Direct on this live stream. Give me just 2 seconds to get this camera in place, and we will be off to the races with our first look at the Omnibus hardcover for the Art of G.I.JOE, a Real American Hero. So if those of you that are joining me can confirm that you have the proper orientation, that would be super helpful. All right, video looks good. Thank you for confirming. I just got to get it locked in place. All right, raise this up just a touch. Once this is set, obviously I won't have to mess with it again. Okay, so here we go, guys. Horizontal aspect ratio, we can do this. There's my thumbs up. All right, let's get it. So this is the Art of G.I.JOE, a Real American Hero. This is the Omnibus hardcover edition. We previously did softcover editions from 2015 to 2018, sold out of those in a year and a half. We did not have product on 3D Joes for 2 or 3 years, which really created a lot of pent up demand for ultimately what we ended up coming out with. I'm a big person, that's a big hand. This is a bigger book. This is 13.5 inches wide by 13.5 inches wide by 14.5 inches tall. So the first thing you're gonna get when you open this up is going to be, this is called an in sheet, and this basically attaches the first signature to the hardcover itself. So we thought it was a really cool nod to why this artwork matters. We got submissions from the backers and from across the interwebs of us guys and gals of our generation enjoying their G.I. Joes at Christmas. This is why the Art of G.I.JOE, a Real American Hero is so special and why it still bonds all of us, because of those timeless memories that we have from when we were children opening this stuff up. So thank you to every one of you that submitted your photos for these in sheets. I think it's a very special way to open and close the book. So you'll see the closing one probably in a couple hours here. All right, here's the opening credits. This was created obviously by 3D Joes and licensed by Hasbro. The first credits are who did the majority of the work. Then there's credits to the creators that were interviewed throughout in the making of this book. And then there's a bunch of thank yous to people that have contributed assets to 3D Joes and to the book. Thank you guys so much. There's also special thanks to folks that have given a significant chunk of their time to helping build 3D Joes for the enrichment of the hobby for all of us. So thank you guys, and you'll see your names in print there. Then we get these opening, now these are called interludes in the hardcover because they're not forwards. Now originally Kirk Bazigian provided 6 of these for all 6 of the softcover issues. You will see those peppered throughout the book, and they are called interludes here. So here is the first one. It's a forward because it is the forward of the book, but every time after this, when you see Kirk's signature and you see Kirk's insight, it'll be referred to as an interlude, and it will come between years. All right, so before we kick off the 1982 figures, I have a really short introduction of what we've been working on, documenting, collecting, documenting, restoring, and presenting the Art of G.I.JOE, a Real American Hero. Then we get into the figures. Now, every figure page or every figure section is gonna have a splash page like this. Every vehicle section is gonna have a splash page like this. This is the final product, you guys. Your book is gonna look just like this. This is basically the first one to come off the press. This is a final engineering pilot. This shows you what your book is going to look like. There's no turning back now. These are being mass produced. They're being shipped to me. They'll get here in December, and I just could not be happier that we're at this point. So I hope you guys are happy with it too. We obviously added all the file cards this go around, so that was a huge addition. We added a little bit for each year. We talk about the different card backs that were available, so everybody knows we had 9 backs and then 11 backs in 1982. We also had the Cobra Commander offer promo here. And so I'll talk about the sequence of that stuff. I'll also talk about commentary from Ron Rudat or Mark Pennington as to why they came up with the characters that they came up with. Now, G.I. Joe was originally the 9 characters. We didn't have an enemy. Now, Marvel sat down with Hasbro, reviewed their pitch deck, and said, who are they going to fight? You guys have probably all heard this story. So they came up with Cobra, and this was Archie Goodwin that recommended it, potentially because of Hydra, who was a Captain America foe. So Cobra became the enemy, and these 2 figures were rushed into production. Cobra Commander was also produced, but they held him for the first Flag Points promotion. And then you'll get into an unadorned art section. So we've got Stalker, we've got Zap, we've got 4 additional figures. Now here's where the book, I think, gets really, really special. So you have the To the Rescue poster, and you have the Stars and Stripes Forever poster, and that's on a pull-out spread. I'm not going to reformat the camera every time we get to one of these, but I can try to pull this down a little bit this way. Okay, so as you can see, this is the first gatefold spread, and it's a natural segue into Ron Rudat, because Ron Rudat actually painted the Stars and Stripes Forever poster. So you get To the Rescue, and you get the Stars and Stripes Forever, which were the 1982 mail order poster, and then you open that double gatefold up, and I can't even show all this, guys. That is one gatefold. It's Ron Rudat's process for designing figures and designing vehicles. He didn't just do figures, he also did vehicles. He also did the entire process for documenting these things for engineering. So the 360 turnarounds, the figure reference system, they were building this plane in the air in 1981. This had not been done at Hasbro prior, and so Ron had to come up with a lot of that. So I thought it was important for the first double gatefold spread to show the primary figure designer from 1982 to 1986. This is 54 inches across, 14.5 inches tall, 54 inches across. 4 pages dedicated to Ron Rudat, the godfather of G.I. Joe, the designer of the Cobra symbol. Most of you know a lot about him. If you don't, go to 3D Joe's and just type in 3D Joe's Ron Rudat, and you'll see an amazing creator profile that I worked very hard with Mr. Rudat to put together. He also illustrated this book, so we go ahead and share that book. And so I'll just go ahead and tuck away. Now you can see with these double gatefolds, anytime you see these 2 arrows, that means it's time to open up and enjoy. All right, so that's the first double gatefold spread. There's 11 of those throughout the book. All right, then we talk about Toy Fair and how it was a mad dash to get ready for Toy Fair. The figure packaging is actually the paintings by Hector Garrido here, but all these vehicles are marker comps. As you can see, one of the marker comps right here, that's from the 1982 Toy Fair catalog. They continued to use marker comps for years that followed, and so I've shown a couple of those. They often featured prototype figures and vehicles in the Toy Fair catalog because the final manufactured specimens were not ready. All right, so now we get into the 1982 vehicles, and I'm gonna slide this over again. And so you have a splash page here. This is the 1982 Vamp. I had the very distinct honor of being able to purchase that piece a while back. That was incredible. So then we get into all the vehicles. And what's new about this over the soft covers is we have very lightly opaque blueprints in the background to fill up this area right here and also tell that part of the story. So when possible, you'll be able to read all the features of the jump, for example. All right, so then I'll shoot through the vehicle section. Every single vehicle is featured. Every vehicle that has a pilot or a driver has the file card featured. And then we get into sections like this where we talk about the shrinkage that they did in 1982. So there were some legal concerns that the packaging was a little too big on a few products, so they ended up shrinking those packages. We also get some unadorned artwork. And then we get into licensing. So licensing was actually handled by Nelson Yomtov. He goes by Nell. He worked at Marvel in their licensing department. Marvel did Hasbro's licensing for G.I. Joe from 1982 to 1994. So you see a lot of letterhead out there, Marvel Comics Group. There's the man right there. We did a nice interview with him. He's a wonderful, brilliant guy, super fun to talk to. I think we talked for like 3 hours. It was great. All right, so then you'll get all the licensed product, anything that featured unique artwork, it will be featured in this book. So every single piece of unadorned, every single piece of painted artwork from 1982 to 1994, plus some of the canceled and unreleased stuff. It's all in this 712-page book. Now, this was a brilliant lunchbox published by Thermos. The line art was provided by Kirk Bazigian. He loved it so much that he reached out to his connection at Thermos and got permission to contact the illustrator, and that's how we ended up with the To the Rescue poster that I've already shown you that ended up being the 1983 catalog art. So that's the same artist that created this Thermos lunchbox. All right, then we have the 1982 collector case illustration in its entirety. So like I was telling you, we featured a close-up earlier. Now you get the whole piece. You see the arrows here, so that tells us that it is time to open up to this double gatefold spread. Now this introduces you to Ed Morrill, who was in charge of branding and packaging from 1969 to 1989. He was actually an external firm, packaging firm out of Manhattan. And he came on and he hired Don Stivers, and they created all the artwork for the adventure team. So if you're a fan of G.I. Joe from 1970 to 1976, you're a fan of Ed Morrell, you're a fan of Don Stivers, and you'll learn all about him on those 2 pages. The reason I introduced him in this book was because he also was in charge of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, and the launch of the branding of that, the launch of that, the hiring of the illustrators, the managing of the illustrators. And so we introduce, the decisions that they made around the relaunch. And of course, we introduce Hector Garrido. And this photograph was provided by his granddaughter, who had fond memories of visiting him in his studio in Connecticut. It's really an honor to be able to connect with her. And thank you again for providing that photograph. So this is in tribute to Hector Garrido, those couple pages. And then if you turn the page over, this is Hector Garrido's work from the 1970s on a book called The Baroness. So I am basically positing that the explosion background's roots are based in Hector's earlier work. Now it's a more photorealistic explosion with some chunks coming out of it. Looks like people could be hurt by it. And Kirk Bizigian said they actually, focus group tested something like that first, and then they ended up making it a more artistic, abstract explosion so that it didn't look so dangerous. Then we have a nice little tribute to Mr. Garrido. This is written by Ed Morrell, who hired and managed him throughout the process. And we explain kind of the end of the era for CLS&M, Coleman, LaPuma, Siegel, and Morrell, which was the packaging firm. In 1989, they basically kind of ended that relationship with Hasbro. Now, Hector Garrido would continue to be hired as a contract illustrator through the end of the line, 1994. Now, the voice of A Real American Hero is Kirk Bizigian. So for the first couple years, Kirk came from copywriting originally. And so Kirk was the voice of G.I. Joe. If you read any of the newsletters, most of the call out text on the packaging, that's all Kirk Bizigian. And so if you're reading G.I. Joe related products for the first couple years, you're really listening to Kirk Bizigian. All right, so this is Airborne, Unadorned Art, Torpedo. This is a photo. Actually, this is scanned from the original painting by Hector Garrido. Shout out to Sam. Love you, man. Thank you so much. You made this book so much better. This is the 1983 figure section. And so I'll just shoot through this really quick. You guys already know what all this is. It's just the figures and the file cards, beautifully, meticulously restored. And then a walkthrough of the different types of card backs. There was explosion card backs, and there was normal card backs. There was a Major Blood promotion that came out with a postcard that was a bit controversial because you had to cut the faces off the front of the cards instead of using the flag points. And that was a diabolical plan by Kirk Bizigian to get the stuff that was basically peg warming in the spring of 1983 off the pegs to make room for the swivel arm stuff. So that was very intentional. A letter that was sent by Hasbro to parents that were wondering why their kids had to buy these things again to cut the faces off of them. So we document all that kind of stuff in detail, and it's based on creator interviews. Now we're into the unadorned art section for 1983. I'll try to shoot through this. Torpedo pre-production art, torpedo proof card, torpedo unadorned painting. Beautiful stuff. Now, I wanted to talk about cartoon artwork. And so we were lucky to get our hands on the original kind of promotional folder from Sunbow. And it had beautiful art by Doug Wildey in it. So many of you probably have not seen these illustrations before. You've seen this one because it was on the newsletter, but these two are much more rare. And so it was very cool to get some Doug Wildey artwork in there and to explain how that came about. Now, here is the G.I. Joe miniseries press kit folder cover, and you'll recognize that artwork because it was utilized for the Aviva die-cast vehicles. And then also again in the 1983 Toy Fair catalog, so this became a kind of ubiquitous image, obviously based upon the G.I. Joe #1 opening splash page. This is a poster. So this is a double gatefold spread. Again, if you see these arrows, you just grab them and open them and enjoy. So this is the cartoon section. You get a poster. This is from the 1985 press kit folder for the cartoon. And this stuff's been, you know, the layouts have been modified where appropriate for optimal flow. Thank you to Chad for working so hard on that spread. It's funny, you remember every hour of work that went into this. This was a this was a poster from the G.I. Joe Mobile Strike Force team newsletter. So when you signed up to be part of that club, you got a poster, and that was a poster that came with it. So obviously we're transitioning into comic book art there. So we get a collecting comic art blurb. This was a poster that came with the G.I. Joe Mobile Strike Force team. The initial, if you signed up in 1982, you got that poster, and obviously that's the cover of G.I. Joe #1. Now, Kirk Bizigian shared some marker comps of G.I. Joe #1. So you can see a couple possibilities that were pitched. Kurt Bazigian still owns these. Then you can see a very rough draft marker comp here. We also show all the newsletters that Kirk wrote, and there's another poster for the 1984 one. So this is kind of the cartoon section that blossoms into the comic book section that blossoms into the kind of fan club stuff. So kind of grouping all that together for 1983. All right, now we want to talk about some of the ubiquitous artwork that was featured all across different mediums in 1982. And the reason for that, according to Neil Yomtov, who again was the licensing executive at Marvel that was in charge of licensing for Hasbro, he said that they had a very small press kit to release, and included in that was the first 2 issues of G.I. Joe. So naturally, people attached to the book, to the comic book cover, and they attached to that glorious opening full-page spread. And they recreated it for their purposes, for the collector display case, or for the miniseries press kit, or for the accessory battle pack. That's a painting by Garrido that was created. Not, it was based on G.I. Joe #1. It was used on the display case, and then it was used on the accessory pack. It obviously influenced Ron Rudat to do an Iwo Jima of his own, and the Sunbow miniseries cover. So these kinds of things, and also the Thermos lunchbox recreated it yet again in painted form, but this is a completely different painting by a different artist. So there were these kind of ubiquitous images across the brand for the first couple years, and really that was because they didn't have much of a press kit to send out at the time. All right, so now we get into the 1983 vehicles, and I should mention that all the catalogs that show the vehicles are shown on the vehicle overview spreads. So several of you asked if the catalogs were going to be included. They are, and they're included on the vehicle overview spreads. Again, in the black areas here, you get blueprints for the Fang here. Follow it down and follow this up. You have the box, and then you have the title, and then you have the blueprints. You have the box, you have the title, and then you have the blueprints. So that's the flow. I also should mention, if you're ever trying to find your place in this book, this is your index. So this is your years. 1983 is what we're on, and it goes through 1995. And then over here is in more detail, 1983. We finished the figures, we finished the Unadorned, we finished the pre-production, we finished the cartoon and comic art. Now we're in the vehicle section. So if you ever want to figure out like kind of where you are, here's your year over here, and here's where you are within that year over here. This is a massive book, and I wanted you guys to be able to find your footing really quickly. So that was our strategy for that. All right, so these are the 1983 vehicles. This is the hardest one to find by far. I think it was only out there for that 1 year, and it's a very hard vehicle to find in nice condition with the box. All right, so now we're in the unadorned art section for the 1983 vehicles. We'll turn that over. We see our 2 arrows again, and we open that up. So I was so lucky to connect with a former employee of Tyco, and they created the train set that you guys all know by Bart Doe, and they also created the trucking set, and I was able to get my hands on those. So I do artist profiles throughout this book. Anytime there's a major contributor, I try to break down kind of their career history, how they interfaced with G.I. Joe, and what else they created throughout their careers, because these are extremely talented artists that touched many more brands than just G.I. Joe. There was a lot of them that have military history. So Bart Dove served in World War II, and he delivered a drawing to General Patton in 1945. Like, how crazy is that? It's amazing. Okay, so that's the train set that was released in 1983. And then here's the trucking set that was released in 1984. And the reason we have these resources that are this beautiful is because I literally was able to purchase this painting for $7,000. And that would not have happened had we not been building 3D Joes and doing the soft covers. And people just found us, because of our passion for this. That's years and years running now. And we were able to connect with these very amazing resources. So here is the licensed peripheral products from 1983. Some really cool stuff in there. Push the calls away. So when you're closing up these double gatefold spreads, just remember to close them back inward the way that you opened them. So put these 2 arrows back together. My concern is that people will turn this over and then try to fold it back that way, and that's not the way you want to go with it. what you want to do is make sure you put the arrows back together. All right, so now we're moving on. That's the end of the license section. Obviously, you can see the whole thing runs together, giant 2-page spread. Again, that's 27 inches across, 14.5 inches tall. So now we're going to get into the Marvel publishing. So Marvel, they weren't just successful with the comic books. They created a bunch of books. And Earl Norm was the primary illustrator for those, and we are very lucky to have as much G.I. Joe Earl Norm artwork as we do. So I wanted to introduce Earl Norm, talk about him a little bit before I showed Operation Disappearance, which the cover and the entire book was illustrated by Earl Norm. Now, I will talk about these books on this page. So if you're curious who did what, you just look right here and it'll tell you the exact credits for who read it, who we think did thumbnails and layouts, who did final paintings. So the Spy Eye was by Herb Trimp, Fred Oppenheimer, Finson Bly, whatever. Odds are that it was written by Finson Bly. Herb Trimp handled breakdowns, and all art was painted by Fred Oppenheimer. The cover was painted by Earl Norm. So if you want full credits, the Spy Eye, cover painted by Earl Norm, and the interiors, you can look right here and see that the art was painted by Fred Oppenheimer. So we give credits everywhere possible throughout this book. We want these artists to be known for their amazing work. Both of these were by Earl Norm. This was a reproduction of some of the previous comic books, but I think with better coloring. So check that out if you don't have it yet, the Trojan Gambit. It's a very beautiful colors, better than any modern day reproductions. This is a big coloring book called Operation Decoy. It was also released with another cover that was more comic book style illustration. We will only show the painted one here because this book is focused on the painted artwork of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. Now, this was a record, and it had original artwork on the front and the back. Castle of the Doomed, if you want to look for that one. So we have an interlude by Kurt Bazigian again. And then we're into the splash page for the 1984 figures. All right, so then we go through the 1984 figures. I'll just rush through these. We talk about some of Ron Rudat's inspiration for the designs. Then we get into the unadorned artwork. I cannot tell you guys how absolutely mind-blowingly good all this stuff looks. I mean, Chad Huckle obsessed over these down to the pixel. You will not find a better resource with better G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero assets. This spread is actually dedicated to telling you guys about the different types of assets, if it's Kodachromes, which are high-resolution transparencies, or if it's Kodak prints. Now, this is a scan of a Kodachrome at 2400 DPI. Print resolution is 300 DPI. So if you scan this Kodachrome at 2400 DPI, you can scale that up 8 times the size with no loss of resolution. So a 6x9 chrome of Duke like this could be scaled up 8 times. That's how we get this, right? With no loss of resolution. This is the best thing next to having the painting. And as I think many of you know, the original painting no longer exists. The original painting was painted over for Tiger Force Duke, for 1988 Tiger Force Duke. So if you have a Kodachrome of Duke, that is the best resource that you will have for that artwork. And you scan it in using a professional graphic art scanner. We use a Epson GA Graphic Arts XL 11000. It's about a $3,500 scanner. And scan it in at 2400 DPI, and then just sit there in Photoshop and restore the heck out of it. That is our process. All right, so here are additional unadorned paintings for 1984. And we wanted to talk about the repetitive poses that you'll notice on some of the card backs. And we interviewed Ed Morrill about this. Ed Morrill was the man that did the thumbnail sketches for each of these packages. So Grunt, Dusty, exact same pose. Cobra, Roadblock, very similar pose. Stalker, Leatherneck, very similar pose. Major Blood, Shockwave, very similar pose. 89, Snake Eyes, version 3, and the Cobra Ninja Viper, very similar pose, arguably painted on top of, potentially. So we wanted to talk about that. We did some interviews on the topic. We interviewed about the rationale behind Zartan being a single carded figure at first and then being rolled out with the chameleon instead. And we were lucky enough to get our hands on Kodachromes and Kodak prints of both of those. So beautiful spread there, describing how the color change plastic resulted in a new category that G.I. Joe had to fill every year, which was a big bad guy with a vehicle. So you saw that in 84 with Zartan, 86 with Serpentor. You saw it again in 88 with Destro version 2. You saw it in 87 with Zanzibar. That's what they considered that one. You saw it with Darklon again. You saw it with Overlord and his Dictator. Like, it just happened again and again. And it all started with Zartan and the Chameleon being so successful at retail that they had to kind of, you know, they didn't want to reinvent the wheel. They wanted to use the same product categories that were useful. And once they had something that was a success, they were obviously going to repeat it again and again and again until it was no longer a success. And so starting with Zartan in 84 and going all the way up through 1990, that's what we got. All right, so now we'll move into the vehicles. You get the catalogs, you get a splash page, and then you go through all the vehicles with all their file cards. Drop dead gorgeous. I couldn't be happier with this, you guys. This is probably like, this is bittersweet, man. It's like sending my kid to college. All right, so this is the Unadorned art for 84. To have something that we've worked on for so long, so hard, and here we are at the end of it, like it's definitely like a little emotional. So anyway, we wanted to talk about how not everything was perfect or beautiful. So the Night Stinger is not a Garrido. The Vamp Mark II, it's not a Garrido. And we'll call a spade a spade. Not everything was perfect in A Real American Hero. And the perspective on this and the perspective on this do not even come close to the perspective on the Vamp Mark I, nor the level of detail with which it was illustrated. So we wanted to talk about how the internal art department, which was run by Matthew Lysak, they would create things on their own, and they emulated Garrido. They didn't necessarily replicate Garrido. They did not have that capability in-house yet. And so if you see something that looks a little bit off, that doesn't look like a Garrido, that looks like it has more airbrushing in it, if it doesn't look like it's meticulously, painstakingly painted with gouache, it's probably not Garrido. So anyway, these are package comps that were done for the 1982 lineup. Pretty interesting. Snake Eyes looks like he's brown. He has an open mask there. But I've been assured that he was supposed to be black, and so that's probably just like a color thing, so black didn't like fade into darkness. Anyway, when you open up this, you see the two arrows again. So you open up this double gatefold spread, and we get unadorned art for the killer whale. Now, the reason that these double gatefold spreads are great is that they allow us to really stretch these landscape aspect ratio illustrations out and show them really large. So that killer whale is pretty huge. We had some extra space there, so I wanted to show off the diagrammatic illustrations that they created to illustrate the play features of each vehicle. Then we have more unadorned artwork. One of my favorites there with rock and roll, rocking the machine gun defense unit. I just think that's a amazing piece of artwork. And I was very lucky to get a Kodachrome of that. So we finish up this double gatefold spread with more unadorned artwork from 1984. That's also another favorite of mine with Recondo and Zap manning the howitzer. All right, so now we're back to books. And this is where we got into the kind of listen and look, where you could listen to a record or listen to a cassette and read along with the book. Now, the artwork is in Earl Norem. It's not quite as beautiful as some of the Earl Norem stuff, but it's still cool. It's still painted artwork, and it's, of course, still included. And there were several of those, so you'll see all of those. Now, the 1985 figure splash page, then you get, of course, all the 1985 figures. You get the twins packaging, which is absolutely gorgeous, just really brilliant conceptually, how the mirrors play off of the twins and their dual personalities, and then you see a dual of each of them in the mirror. And on the back of the package, this was the first package that had two paintings on it. On the back of the package, there's the twins looking at each other basically through a mirror, one with a scar, one without. Interviews with Ron Rudat tell about, or actually Ed Morrell's speaking here. So you'll see a mix of quotes from Ron Rudat, Ed Morrell, Kirk Bazigian, Mark Pennington, whoever's appropriate to that section and had good stories to share, that's who we'll be speaking with. So talking about all the promos and different card backs that were available in 1985, the mail order offers are included there, of course. Now, we wanted to touch on all the variants of file cards. We're only featuring one file card for each figure, but I wanted to show that there are tons of variants out there for you guys to collect. So if everybody knows about Zartan and the kind of dust up over him being paranoid schizophrenic and how they edited it to remove that. Not many people know, well, I'd say proportionately less people know that there was 5 Buzzer file cards. Amazing the iterations that they created for Buzzer. First, they take out his mental health issues. Then they take out that he became fascinated with the biker gang that he was researching, and that's when he converted into a biker gang guy. It's just, you know, we had one version and then they edited it a little bit and then they put a new sticker on it, or they edited this one, put a sticker on it, then they printed it this way, and then they decided to revise it again, and then they rolled them out in 86 with just a graphic design update. So I wanted you guys to see how many different iterations there could be of any given file card. So we're in the unadorned art section. And again, you know, for each of these unadorned art sections, I like to talk about where I got this stuff. So this came from a licensing folder that had a bunch of prints in it, Kodak photo prints. They're good sources. They're third tier sources. So top tier source is the painting. Number two source is top tier source is the original painting. Number two source would be a Kodachrome high resolution transparency. Number three source would be a Kodak photo print. Number four source would be a printed book that shows the unadorned artwork. That's not quite as good because then you're going to see the printing artifacts. So I'll explain kind of where all these came from. Now, as I started to secure multiple examples of different pieces of unadorned artwork, I started to notice some differences in them. So you'll see this Crimson Guard, and you can tell which one is the earlier and which one's the later by which one ended up on the final product. So this Crimson Guard was edited really significantly. So I'll call out all the different edits that were made here with the shoulder pauldrons, for example, or the insignias on his rank, or the size of his helmet. There's just tons of changes that are made here. The same with eels. He originally had little water bubbles coming up off of him. He had a much smaller backpack. He's got this gigantic backpack here, and the bubbles have been removed. Why? I don't know. I talked about it with Ed Morrill, the guy that was in charge of packaging. He said that the artwork was never returned to them for revisions. So neither Ed Morrill nor Hector Garrido were responsible for these revisions, which tells you that it happened in-house at Matt Lizak's department. And so one example of this is CoverGirl. They created a dramatic CoverGirl portrait. And we know about this portrait because it was released on the trading cards that came out in 1986. This is the original artwork with the original portrait. But what we received on the final product is a much more upright, much more brightly lit, and much more emotionless CoverGirl. So here's the CoverGirl that has all the drama that made it out in the trading card set. Here's the CoverGirl that, in Ed Morrill's words, looks like she's driving a 40-ton tank to go grocery shopping. There's no emotion there, right? So Ed Morrill was very disappointed in these revisions that were made to CoverGirl. He was not happy about it. It's so fun to talk with these guys and see how like emotionally attached they still are to this stuff. So I vote for this Eels as the better painting. So that's the one that I'm including kind of full size there for you guys to enjoy. And we'll just keep going through the unadorned art section here. Snow Serpent's another one that went through significant revisions. This was the original rocket design with these little fins coming off of it. And oddly enough, the handle is hidden by his glove here. But if you look at the painting here, Hector Garrido didn't put the handle on this AK-47. So the revised painting has the handle put in there and corrects the rocket for the actual rocket that was released. But you can see in the original drawings and then the presentation artwork by George Woodbridge, more on him in a bit, they were going to release this rocket with these little fins coming off of it. Now, I'm working on toys these days, and I know that would never release from a two-piece mold. If you're doing injection molded plastic and going long ways with it and splitting the mold that way, those fins would never release. Now, maybe the plan was to go this way, but that's not possible because then the plastic would get stuck on the other side of these fins. So it couldn't go that way. If the mold had to go that way, they had to get rid of these little fins right here. So I think that's what happened. That's why they got rid of that rocket and did this rocket. This is a two-piece mold, and the mold could go that way. So that's why you see one fin here, one fin at the 90-degree angles. That's why you see those fins. That piece would release from a two-piece mold. That piece, no way that it would. So that's just speculation on my part as to why they made that change. All right, so now we're in the 1985 vehicle section. You get the catalog, you get the unadorned art. Now this is a pre-production piece for the USS Flag, and oddly enough, you see Flint giving a tour to Torch. So we put a little close-up on that here. I was able to get this Kodachrome, scan it, zoom it in. This is a very early version of the USS Flag with some corrections yet to be made. All right, then we'll go through the 1985 vehicles. We talk about the elusive exclusives. As you guys know, it started in 1982 with the Cobra Missile Command headquarters. That tradition continued for many, many years. So here are the two Sears sets from 1985. Then we'll go into the double gate fold spread. So when you see these arrows, you grab the arrows and you open it up and enjoy. So here is the Cobra Hydrofoil, the Moray, designed by Ron Rudat. And we talk about in this double gate fold spread, the product photography that was used on the catalog and also on the back of the product package to show off the features for each of these. Sorry guys, I'm seeing some of your comments, man, and I want to engage with you guys and talk with you guys, and I totally should, but I'll lose my train of thought as well. So I'm going to rush through the book, and then I'm going to address the comments. So this is the transportable tactical battle platform, and here's the role of advertising and artwork. So this is basically taken from, I was so lucky I got to interview Bob Prupus shortly before he passed away. Thank you so much to his daughter, Sherry, for making that connection. This leans on the Bob Prupus interview, Kirk Bazigian's interview, and talking about in 1982, why did they decide to invest in painted artwork for every single product? This was such a huge investment on Hasbro's part, and they believed in the power of illustration. So this interview is everything to me. This is why this book exists. Bob Prupus and Kirk Bazigian knew they needed to tell this story, and they didn't have a movie. They were going to have a comic book, but they didn't have it right out of the gate. Keep that in mind. So they believed 100% that these illustrations had to tell a compelling story of G.I. Joe. They had to enroll you and enlist you and make you believe in this brand and want to live in this world by investing heavily in beautiful artwork that told compelling stories. And so I just love that interview. I hope you guys love it too. All right, so we're continuing through the 1985 vehicles. And then we get into the unadorned artwork, courtesy of a licensing guide that was rolled out in 1986, but it featured 1985 artwork. There was also a 1986 sticker calendar that featured a lot of beautiful unadorned artwork. If you want to search for that, it's by Hoyle Products. You can find that on eBay sometimes. So we've got a lot of 1985 unadorned artwork. You can tell the international ones because they have these little logos on them that came from the licensing folder. And then stuff like this usually comes from a Kodachrome or Kodak print. All right, so now we're going to get into the premiere issue of G.I. Joe magazine. So this was a licensed magazine, and it was painted by Hector Garrido, the cover, and he's credited on the inside. And then the 1985 catalog artwork that I call Yo Joe, that was actually repainted. Now, this all stayed the same, but they repainted the background to make it a nighttime scene with fireworks, and that's pretty cool. That was the pull-out poster for the first issue of the magazine. So here we are at a double gatefold spread. Grab those arrows, spread them. All right, the Get Into Action, this was an insert with the Action Stars cereal, so we'll talk about that a little bit. This was an ad inside of the magazine that was enrolling you in the club that they wanted you to join. So here's our first chance to show the 1985 catalog art in all its glory. Shout out to Dan Uthman. He sold me that Kodachrome. You know, again, every image that I have came from somewhere. And I can't thank the people enough that thought of me, you know, as the right place that asset should go to. Because they believed that I would do something well with it. So, you know, Dan Uthman, thank you for entrusting me with this Kodachrome, worth every penny. I can't thank you enough. I've got the 85, 86, and 87 catalog Kodachromes now, and I couldn't be happier. I'm still looking for the To the Rescue Kodachrome, if anybody out there has it, as well as the 1990 puzzle collage. So anybody comes across those, please connect with me. You know I'll do something good with it through 3D Joes. Now, we got these Find Your Fate books, and issues 1 through 4 came out in 85, so those are featured here. The rest of them will be featured in a double gatefold spread. And the reason that I broke them out separate was not only the year, but also the artist. Issues 1 through 4 were illustrated by Carl Kassler. Issues 5 through 20 were illustrated by Hector Garrido. So I wanted to keep those together. All right, Cobra's Revenge was a licensed book by Color Forms with some fun artwork. And then Milton Bradley was acquired by Hasbro. They pretty quickly made this 4-piece puzzle collage. I believe that was illustrated by Garrido. Don't think I'm 100% certain on that. And then they also created this Milton Bradley Commando Attack game. Now, this is, again, an emulating Garrido situation where it's not quite as good as Garrido, but clearly they were taking notes based off of his work. And then we're in the licensed category again, showing some more stuff there. Now, Hasbro Direct is what Kirk Bazigian left G.I. Joe to work on. So 1984, I believe, is when Jose Banks, the son of Jose Banks, joined Hasbro to help them build out Hasbro Direct. So Kirk Bazigian already had some success with the Manta, Major Blood, Cobra Commander. Those various G.I. Joe offers were successful. Successful enough that they invested in bringing over the son of Jose Banks. Jose Banks had been sold by that time. He came over to Hasbro, worked with Kirk Bazigian for 3 years to build out Hasbro Direct into a multi-million-dollar business. Now, they hired an agency in Manhattan called BBDO, and BBDO would hire different illustrators to create the Hasbro Direct marketing pieces. So you'll see a wide variety of illustrators on Hasbro Direct offers, and most of them are beautiful and compelling. So credited where possible, oftentimes not possible to credit them, but in some cases we did figure it out. So here's another interlude by Kurt Bazigian talking about how things were changing going into 86. Here's the 82 to 85 branding by Ed Morrill, CLS&M, and Matt Lizak's internal Hasbro department. And here is the 1986 revised explosion background, 1986 revised logo. The packaging photos went from the red background to actually shot on this kind of gradient, but it didn't matter because that was edited to remove entirely. So vehicles were just shown on black at that point. Figures went from being featured in dioramas to shot on these white backgrounds and shown individually on the cross sells and the catalogs. They also started coming up with annual themes for every year. So the theme for 1986 was Live the Adventure. And obviously Steel Brigade helped people to live the adventure. Now we'll get into the 1986 figures. That's the big splash page, and then you get all figures. This is one of my favorite years because this is the year Mom let me start buying G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero. Zorana, as most of you know, she was mulled over. There was a lot of conversation around Zorana. They were not happy with her head sculpt, as is explained in this memo. And so they only ran 50,000 units of this head sculpt. Bill Merkline was hired as quickly as possible to sculpt a new head, and that was rushed into production, and we ended up with this Zorana. And so there's only 50,000 units of her mint on card out there, actually created, certainly not still out there mint on card. So if you're a mint on card collector, go get your Zorana with earrings before everybody reads this section, and I expect the value will go up on her because of the exposure of this 50,000 pieces. Limited to 50,000 pieces. Now, the original artwork for her, Hasbro, is actually creating a new Zorana that has the bare shoulder with the dragon tattoo in honor of Ron Rudat's original design for her, which is amazing. Shout out to Hasbro for, seeing some of this pre-production stuff and making the figures to kind of make up for what we lost back in the day. Again, file card variants for Xandar. So just calling out different things here and there. This is some of Bill Merkline's sculpting portfolio. He's a good friend of mine. I've been up to his house and stayed with him several times now. He is an amazing figure sculptor. I started working with Hasbro in 83. Rakonda was his first figure. Worked on figures through 89. His last products were on shelves in 1990. This is from Ron Rudat, showing that the Bats was originally a bionic trooper with a flesh arm. And so this guy was originally bionic, which means a combination of a human and technology. He was not actually an android at first. Good thing they turned him into an android so that Sergeant Slaughter could tear him apart in the cartoon. So Sergeant Slaughter came on board in 1986. The spring of 1986, he had this promotion on card backs, and then later in 86, you had the body transfer promotion. So again, we're talking about all the different card backs that were available, different promo pack-ins like the stickers that were available. These stickers came with the card set, but they actually were same artwork was used for the body transfer tattoos. We talk about the exclusive Special Mission Brazil, which featured a new figure, which was Claymore, kind of a kit bash of previous figures. Now, they actually repainted over the original paintings to create these file card paintings that had the revised decos for 86. So sadly, if you look at a photo of the full wetsuit painting, it's got gray just on part of it, and then it's got the original brighter deco on the rest of the painting. I don't call everything beautiful and amazing if it's not. And so I did want to call out how ridiculous this Cobra Battle Gear set was, how they took Flash off of it and put a Crimson Guard. Basically, I guess he's running away from the Joes, but he's like flying through midair as if he had jumped off the tank. It's just a silly illustration. And they also edited it to put in the new digital explosion background. So not every decision was brilliant. But overall, it's an unparalleled brand with artwork investment that was rivaled by none. I wholeheartedly believe that Hasbro invested more in unique painted artwork for this brand than any toy company did on any other brand, and I would gladly debate that with anybody. So come at me. All right, so this is the cereal that was created. They actually invested a tremendous amount of money in advertising for Action Stars, so this was a huge win for Hasbro. Commercials started airing in the fall of 1985. The Wave 1 boxes, there was 3 different boxes. They did not offer Starduster yet, but they did tease Starduster with this little photo showing that he was coming. And then the Wave 2 boxes, there was 3 different Wave 2 boxes, and those actually offered Starduster, and you could get them. They also included these 3 mini comics that were created by Marvel, and you could send off for Starduster, and you get him back with the file card and the figure. Now, after Action Stars, Starduster was still available for many, many years. I believe through 1990 with the Incredible Shrinking Joes. That's the last time that he was available. Now, he was still shown all the way through 1993 with the Fangs of Doom, but he wasn't available for purchase at that time. He was just shown with the Pocket Patrol. So now we're back into the cartoon section, and these are some of the posters that were made by FHE because they were selling the VHSs in stores. And there's some trade magazine ads and that kind of thing. And then this beautiful image illustrated by Will Munijo. So I absolutely love this illustration. This was for the series second season of the cartoon. That was for a trade advertisement, I believe. But just a brilliant illustration, top to bottom. So we talk about G.I. Joe, the movie here. This is the American poster, and this is the international poster. As you can see, edited to take out the red, white, and blue stars and stripes. Grab these 2 little arrows and open it up. And this is one of my favorite of the double gatefold spreads. So this is the cartoon art section. This came from the show Bible that belonged to Flint Dill, who was a writer and showrunner and editor for the show. So you have all the black and white stuff over here on the left-hand side. It's got a mix of, you know, letterhead explaining things, who are the new characters. It had turnarounds, which for the cartoon were used for the illustrators to make sure that they illustrated the figures consistently. It's got the full bios by Larry Hama and a mix of some presentation art by like George Woodbridge for those 2, cartoon cells again and again. And then on this side, we have full color models for the cartoon, which are gorgeous. This is a shout out to my friend Steve Chu, who's a super collector, and he connected with Flint Dill. And basically that is the way that all of this brilliant content from this double gatefold spread made it into the Omnibus hardcover. So really fun double gatefold. Again, when you're done with it, put the corners back together and put the arrows back together and then move on. So now we're in the unadorned art section for 1986. So here's a little 2-page spread on Guy Cassidy. Now, Guy Cassidy is just a brilliant vehicle designer. His first project was the Conquest X30, and so that's detailed. That's shown here in great detail. But he also became the king of big vehicles. He did the Mobile Command Center, he did the Rolling Thunder, he did the General, he did the Hammerhead. Like, he was the king of big vehicles. But he also did a bunch of little vehicles, and we'll talk more about that later. I went to Guy Cassidy's house in, 2013? So it's been 10 years ago now that I first met Guy Cassidy, and you will not meet a nicer guy that worked on the brand. He's just amazing. So anyway, it's so great to have formed these friendships with these people and to be able to share their stories throughout this book. And I want to give a shout out to Hasbro for a second here. I wrote 75,000 words for this book based primarily on the interviews that I did with these creators. And guess what? Hasbro did not edit a single word of that content. Thank you, Hasbro, for letting these creators tell their stories, unedited, unvarnished. Okay, so now we're into the 1986 vehicle section. We'll shoot through those. You obviously get all the file cards that came with each one of those. Get into the exclusive Dreadnought ground assault stuff, air assault stuff. I love those. All right, so here we are at another double gatefold spread. And this is unadorned artwork as well as the product photography that I was telling you guys about. And this is just a brilliant photo. I got a large transparency of this, and it shows the original head sculpt for Zorana. It shows her with blue shoulder armor, which I thought was interesting. You have the Serpentor with the gold neck. And those are the kinds of things you can start to realize about these when you have these high resolution Kodachromes and you're able to scan them in super high resolution and zoom in and look at all these details and kind of obsess over this stuff. So here is year 2 of Hasbro Direct. So we were able to pin down that this was illustrated by Theodore Giavis, aka Ted, because a corner of this illustration had half of his signature on it. And it's literally like that clue that I was able to kind of reverse engineer and figure out who that signature belonged to. So Ted Giavis did this. He was hired by BBDO, Hector Garrido again did the Live the Adventure 1986 catalog art. There's the Live the Adventure logo that I got off of Kodachrome, and the G.I. Joe logo that I got off another Kodachrome. Shout out to Joe Goldston, my good friend, who purchased that from Dan Klingensmith, and that's where that comes from. All right, so if you open these two arrows, here is the Find Your Fate spread, and ain't it glorious? So this is issues number 5 through 20, and they are all by Hector Garrido. And one of the things I wanted to talk about here was how he used some repetitive poses. And, you know, I interviewed Ed Morrill about this. I interviewed Kirk Bazigian about this. And they both felt like he just did it because it would be faster that way. Not because he necessarily was told you need to use the same poses as the package art for like recognition, ease of recognition for these characters that people were already familiar with. It wasn't like a decision that came from Hasbro. Garrido decided, I'm going to take this Flint facial expression and I'm going to use it here again because why not? I'm going to take this Snake Eyes pose and I'm going to use it here again because why not? Crimson Guard, I'm going to paint him the same pose, but he did change some things. So you notice like the badge is missing on that shoulder, or you'll notice on the Baroness that her glasses are missing, that kind of thing. So anyway, BBDO was doing some absolutely beautiful artwork, and this was illustrated by Paul Alexander. Now, Paul Alexander, isn't this just gorgeous? Paul Alexander actually did the artwork for Air Raiders. And so you might notice this from the cross-sell catalog for Air Raiders. And this is a nice little detailed close-up of it. Now, Paul Alexander tended to sign his work. And so you'll notice a signature on the mountain right here. So that was an easy one to find for Paul Alexander. I also was able to scan this Kodachrome, and his signature was on the margins of that Kodachrome. So it's nice when they make it easy for us. He also had the Alexander signature right under Cobra Commander's leg right there. But Paul Alexander was a brilliant illustrator. I wish we got more G.I. Joe stuff from him. So in 1987, they kicked off the G.I. Joe magazine again. And this is, you know, they had only done one issue previously. So this is where they really started producing several more issues. Now, Dave Dorman, by this point, had been brought in to create presentation artwork for Hasbro's new G.I. Joe figures. They had to show presentation artwork to management to get them to buy off on each upcoming figure. And so Dave Dorman was brought in to also illustrate the interior artwork for G.I. Joe magazine. So you'll see several pieces by him in the pages that follow. The Hector Garrido 1986 catalog art was edited to remove Hawk and the low crawl vehicle and a couple other elements, the big tree, the snake that was going through. And they added the Triple T and they added Sergeant Slaughter. So this was basically a late 1986 release. So the original catalog art, I call that an early 86 release. I call this a late 86 release. All right, so we're moving into 1987's magazines, but before we go there, I wanted to show you guys this piece. This was contributed by Jim Sorensen. So thank you so much, Jim, for providing this. Now, why is this in a G.I. Joe book? Because this is Brad Armbruster, Ace from G.I. Joe. If you watch the Masterson team episode of Inhumanoids, he was out on a mission and he recounts that he was shot down out of the sky. His plane crashed and he ended up in this hospital bed, literally wrapped up in the metal of his plane. So they were able to save him, and he basically joined the team and helped to fight the Inhumanoids. So this is just a really interesting story. It also continues in Augur for President, which I believe was the season finale. And so there he is getting up out of his hospital bed, and he's been fixed, he's been repaired, and he's ready to go out and fight again. So just such a crazy story. The way that, you know, Flint decided to overlap the Inhumanoids with G.I. Joe. Just kind of crazy. And yeah, they did this intentionally. Buzz Dixon was quoted by saying that they worked on several shows to basically create a shared continuity universe before that was kind of the thing that everybody wants to do now that Marvel has proven it's successful. So shared continuity universe, Inhumanoids, a special appearance by Ace after his plane wreck. All right, so we'll move on to the 1987 figures. You got a beautiful splash page here with Falcon, my favorite, of course. All the 1987 figures. All right, so this is where Mark Pennington came in, and Ron Rudat had already designed the rough drafts for most of the 1987 figures. He had already done kind of the ideation, the toying around with different designs, the working with the brand manager to kind of refine and decide which ones they were going to move forward with. But they still needed to do all the figure sculpture sheets, the turnarounds, the accessory engineering drawings, and that kind of thing. Most of that was left undone. And so you'll learn how Mark Pennington kind of picked it up and carried it forward for 1987. Now, he was hired on December 31st, 1985, and his first day wasn't until 1986. It was just kind of an accounting thing. They wanted him in the system before the end of the year. So Mark Pennington started in 1986, and he created a ton of the 1987 stuff. Some of it was finishing up Ron's work. Some of it was his work from scratch. Jinx was actually his work. And so you'll learn about that. You'll also see some figures like Falcon here, where Ron Rudat did the original accessory designs, and then Pennington just came up behind him and did some revisions, like adding in the knife that slid down in there. So, this was much more of a collaborative effort. I'd say Ron Rudat did 75%, 80% of the lifting. He did the figure turnaround for this one, for example. But anyway, we'll describe in detail how those two kind of handed it off. Now, Steel Brigade was done by Ron Rudat, and we wanted to share some of this artwork here. This is all Bill Merkline's sculpture portfolio, and these are all Mark Pennington's basically turnaround drawings. These turnaround drawings would be used in the creation of these figures. So this is what Bill Merkline was referencing when he sculpted that figure. So we've kind of put them side by side here, so you can see kind of before and after what Outback looked when Mark Pennington drew it, what Outback looked like when Bill Merkline sculpted it. So some pretty cool back and forth stuff here. 1987 card backs and offers. We'll talk about those. Then we get into the subgroups. So you got the Battle Force 2000 in 1987, first big subgroup, not counting Special Mission Brazil. Then we talk about the G.I. Joe the movie figure, the 2 3-packs, and now how they had original artwork on the back of them as well, kind of like the twins from 1985. So then you flip that over and you got a 2-page spread showing all 6 file cards and the 2 mint on card specimens, as well as the artwork from the back of the card backs as well. All right, now Ron Rudat created a bunch of examples of Pythona. None of these actually went through to fruition. The Pythona design was created by Sunbow, the one that we all know and love from the movie. I got my hands on a 1987 licensing guide, and this had Kodachromes for every single figure from 1987. So because of that, you will see every single mainline 1987 figure in the Unadorned art section. So again, if you're ever looking for a specific product, you go down the years, you can see that we're at 1987 here, and then we're at the Unadorned art section. If you're looking for the raw artwork, you'll find it under Unadorned. We wanted to talk about some of the revisions that were made. Jinx was originally going to have the G.I. Joe logo on her leg and a much larger dragon on her chest. You could see on the painting where they painted over the original dragon and where they painted over the original logo that was on her leg. So we wanted to call out that for revising the Art of G.I. Joe. This is, again, yet another brilliant George Woodbridge presentation illustration. So you'll see every 1987 figure. This is not by Hector Garrido. So they started to mix in different illustrators at this point, and this is clearly not Hector Garrido. I went through with Doug Hart for somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 or 9 hours, and we went through the whole softcover series and tried to determine who illustrated what. I also went through with Ed Morrill, who was in charge of packaging from 1969 and 1989, and we tried to determine who was responsible for what. So if you see credits on these Unadorned art sections, those are based by Doug Hart, who was an internal painter at Hasbro, and Ed Morrill, who hired and managed Hector Garrido from 1982 to 1989. All right, so we're wrapping up the 1987 stuff. Now this is the first carded package illustration created by Doug Hart for G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. So it's a perfect time to introduce Doug Hart. So we have an artist profile for him. Now I originally met him at HasCon in 2017. We're now working together on Operation Recall. He is an absolute pleasure to deal with. He's just such a friendly, lovable guy, incredibly talented. And, I just feel really lucky to know him. So we've got a good 4-page spread there. This is all based off of a pretty extensive interview that I did with Doug. And so then we get into the 1987 vehicles. Shout out to Guy Cassidy, who put his name into the sticker there. See the Cassidy. So they put all kinds of little references on the vehicles in the decal sheets. Another one, I think it's a Deadeye or Eagle Eye on the back of this vehicle. That was in reference to one of Guy Cassidy's relatives who worked on a ship in World War II and was known for shooting sharks in the water or something to that effect. All right, so here's the 1987 vehicles. Any of these creators that you want to learn about, go to 3D Joe's, go under pre-production, and then go under the creators tab, and you'll see some pretty large resources that we've put together to introduce you to these people's work. All right, so now we're in the Unadorned art section for 1987. This piece was actually a joint collaboration. Doug Hart did the top, and Hector Garrido did the bottom. So that was really fun to figure out. Now, there was another calendar that came out in 1989 by Landmark, but we'll show that here because that is where we find a lot of great 1987 assets. Now, this is one of those that is a bit of a mystery. This mystery kind of continues. So I've got another interview that I need to do. I've got to track the guy down, of course. There's always got to be, they have to be willing and able to do the interviews. So I've got a lead and I'm working on it basically. But I believe that this was going to be the catalog illustration for 1987. But then when they rushed the Defiant through into production, they scrapped this image and Doug Hart created the new 1987 catalog image. That's the theory that makes the most sense right now. So back to Earl Norham. This is Fool's Gold. This was a Kodachrome contributed by Paige Wagner. Again, everywhere this stuff came from, I remember it. I thank you all. And so we wanted to talk about Earl Norham again because we know that Earl Norham did this one because Chris Murray has the original pencils for this. They're signed by Norham. We believe very strongly that both of these were illustrated by Earl Norham. We do not believe that this is Earl Norham. We think this is Hector Garrido. And that's all talked about on the previous page. Now, Earl Norham illustrated both of these books, again for Marvel. Operation Raging River and Operation Starfight have some of the best G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero painted artwork that you will find. And so he was actually credited inside on those, very easy, but I think most of us recognize Earl Norham's artwork by now. He was not credited on any of these. So these were created by Ballantine Books and they're called young adult fiction books. There was 6 of these, but we do have several pieces of data that confirm that these are Earl Norham's. So there was a eBay auction that showed the pencils for this, signed by Earl Norham, and there was an eBay auction for these that showed the rough drafts for what would end up being the cover of The Sultan's Secret, both credited to Earl Norham. I think we can safely extrapolate that all 6 of these were illustrated by Earl Norham. So he's credited as such. All right, now we're back into the G.I. Joe the magazine. There's a lot of artwork in here by Dave Dorman. He started doing the pull-out posters as well as the covers. Now, they started getting other interior artists. Paul Jennis did these. Hovlak, I'm going to say this wrong, Hovik Delakian did these illustrations here. But Dave Dorman did the cover for this one. And that's been edited, so that it looks raw. There was also some other cool illustrations in there for the Visionaries. I just kind of snuck that in there. All right, so the magazine, basically, it was the Dave Dorman show by this point. Well, again, we've got Hovik's interior artwork on these, but Dave Dorman was doing the covers and the posters by this point. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the external presentation artwork of George Woodbridge and David Dorman. So there was internal presentation artwork that was shown to management to get approval to move forward on the engineering side of figure development. Now, once they had that approval, they also created external presentation artwork. And the reason they held off on creating that is that they had to spend money on this. This was contract work. George Woodbridge and Dave Dorman were not Hasbro employees. They were paid every time, right? So they weren't going to create external presentation artwork until they knew that management was letting them move forward with the engineering aspect of that figure. So George Woodbridge was hired and David Dorman were hired as contractors to create beautiful polished presentation artwork for new G.I. Joe figures. These would be shown in sales meetings with buyers like Toys R Us, Sears, and so forth. Absolutely beautiful artwork. Thank you to Dan Moore for letting me scan the original painting of this one. Again, I always remember you guys. All right, so the wrap-up of the magazine, this is the last couple issues here. Interestingly, we were able to nail down, let's see, Kirchner. What's his full name? Paul Kirchner is actually credited right there. Paul Kirchner illustrated this stuff. He worked in toys. He worked on Dino Riders, Crash Dummies, Spy Tech for Tychos. He wrote the backstories, did the Impact comics and the animation scripts. So you'll learn a little bit about every artist that I can properly give credit to. You'll learn a little bit about them. This was another Dave Dorman cover, also credited Lorene Haynes. That's my favorite of all the covers that Dorman did. Mark Pennington, figure designer, did these interior illustrations. I thought that was pretty fun. Dave Dorman did these interior illustrations for this story. And, you know, it's got my boy Falcon, so I got to love it. All right, so BBDO was still at it, creating beautiful illustrations for mail order items. Live the Adventure, year 2. Now, year 1 was Invade Cobra Island. Year 2 was Operation Space Station, but look at this Defiant illustration. That's just gorgeous. So again, Kirk Bazigian did not remember or have information on who the illustrator was for this mail order offer insert, but it was definitely an illustrator that was hired by BBDO, and they created some beautiful illustrations. This is more BBDO stuff. Sergeant Slaughter is still hanging in there strong, still battling Cobra Commander. But, you know, not every BBDO illustration was brilliant. This one's okay. You know, this one's pretty darn good. This one's, it's just okay. And this one's okay. This one's great. And then these are just, let's be honest, these are not great. So I talked with Kirk Bazigian about that, and we've got some candid commentary in there from Kirk. We've got candid commentary from the creators throughout this book. So now we're in the license section. And Marsh Allen Industries was popular with creating kind of like metal tin-based products. And so they did lunch trays, trash cans, hot plates, like where you put your pot on when it's hot off the stove kind of thing. So some unique artwork that obviously emulates what they did with the package art, but it's a completely new illustration of it. And then we got some kind of Vietnam-era green shirts jumping out of the tomahawk. I absolutely love that dinner tray and trash can illustration. All right, so we'll talk about that. And then Presto Magic, they did some pretty cool little stickers. So we started having fun, Chad and I, with the layout of this stuff. If there's items that looked like they could be on top of the pages, like these stickers, we started having them bust through the kind of panels on the left and right where it made sense. And I think that adds like a lot of depth to the book. So Chad and I had a really good time working on this. Again, it's kind of bittersweet. You know, we got to figure out what we want to do next for a passion project. We've got our day jobs. We've got our, you know, our kind of traditional ways that we make a living. But, you know, for me, this has been a passion project for many, many years. And I'll keep rolling with 3D Joes. Obviously, I'll keep rolling with Operation Recall. But best believe there's going to be something right behind this that I'm going to dig in on. All right, this is the 1988 accessory Battle Gear accessory pack for Cobra. This was illustrated by Earl Norham. Again, Chris Murray has the original of this. Now, I was able to get the 9x11 or so Kodachrome, scan it in at 2400 DPI, and then blow that up over here. I mean, who's ever seen this illustration at this level of detail? The only way you could do that is by having that original Kodachrome, a large one, and scanning it in 2400 DPI and just really zooming in on it. So that's a beautiful illustration of Hardball, Shockwave, Spearhead, and Max. And I think, honestly, Spearhead and Max looks better here. They look better here than they did on their package art. Spearhead and Max were not illustrated by Garrido, and we talk about that in here as well. So 1988 figure page, spread, splash page. This is by Earl Norham. We're 99% certain. Hydro Viper's an absolutely beautiful painting. So they were using some contractors at this point, and it was a mix of people. I believe this is Earl Norham as well. Yeah. You can tell a Garrido. This is absolutely not a Garrido because Garrido would have used a heavy white outline here to separate the foreground element of the rifle from the background element of the body, like on Shockwave right here. This is how you can tell a Garrido. This is how you can definitely confirm that it is not a Garrido. All right. So we get into, you know, the 1988 figures. Now, this is the Mark Pennington show, so there's a lot of commentary from Mark here about why he designed different figures, different elements that played into it. We talk about all the different card backs and offers that came out in 1988. Toy Fair, they're still using marker comps for the vehicles going into Toy Fair catalogs. So I wanted to show that. This was actually the last year that they did that. They would not show marker comps in Toy Fair catalogs going forward. They did their first live action TV commercial that was fully live action, not like a cameo by the fridge or a cameo by Sergeant Slaughter. This was a full 30-second live action commercial. This was by BBDO. The advertising agency that helped build Hasbro Direct for Kirk Bazigian. They were the ones that pitched live action. Griffin Bacall kind of elbowed their way into the project, but it definitely came from BBDO. And this was the precursor to the 1990 live action TV commercials that we would see in 1990. All right, Hit and Run. This is another exclusive, Target exclusive. We got the 2 packs of Battle Force 2000 that were re-releases. We have the Toys R Us Night Force stuff. We have the Tiger Force re-releases. Again, these were painted on top of the original paintings. So these original paintings do not exist anymore. Every one of these was painted over by Hector Garrido. Ed Morrill was shipped the artwork. Ed Morrill passed them off to Hector Garrido, and they painted over the originals. All right, this was a very cool piece. Got this from Bill Merkline. This was the sculpt sheet drawn by Mark Pennington, so Mark Pennington has signed it, sculpted by Bill Merkline, and signed by Sergeant Slaughter. So I got this triple signed for, I sold this on behalf of Bill Merkline, and got it triple signed and scanned it. And I thought that was just an amazing opportunity to get all 3 people. It is Sergeant Slaughter. It was designed by Mark Pennington, and it was sculpted by Bill Merkline. Here you see the photos of Bill Merkline's actual sculpt that he made. Here's the internal memo kicking it off. Here's the marketing where they show their Hasbro LJN figure that is dominating the LJN figures. He's literally got his foot on the throat of Hulk Hogan. He's 8 inches of Slaughter power, and you don't want to play around with 8 inches of Slaughter power. All right, anyway, 1988 vehicle spreadsheet. Splash page, I should call that. And then you got the 1988 catalog. You get all the 1988 vehicles, all the file cards. I could not be happier with how this looks. The Night Force exclusives, the Tiger Force repaints, and action packs. Now, we were lucky to get some of the original Unadorned artwork for the action packs. These were by Hector Garrido. These are proof cards for the vehicle packs. These are very hard to find, very short supply. These 2 came from this calendar, so I do try to call out where you guys can search out and acquire some of these unadorned art pieces. If you want the original prints, you know where to go, kind of thing. This was the original presentation artwork by Mark Pennington for the Scuba Pack. Thank you again to Sam. Now, this was illustrated by David Graves. I was very happy to get this little piece of information from Doug Hart when we did our big sit-down interview to try to figure out and pin down who did each illustration. Dave Graves worked for Hasbro internal in the packaging department, and so this was his one kind of shot at glory with G.I. Joe. So it was very cool to be able to give him some credit for that. A little bit of unadorned artwork, a little bit of BBDO direct mail, but they were definitely like tapering off the BBDO stuff by this point in 1988. This was a puzzle collage. This was the second puzzle collage that Hasbro had released for G.I. Joe that Milton Bradley had released. I'm actually going to switch these lights out. Give me just 1 second, guys. I'll be right back with you. How am I doing, guys? You hanging in there with me? Is everybody enjoying this? I got, what, 49 people on here. I hope you guys are enjoying this little review. Thank you for sticking with me. So we are in the licensed section here. And so, again, Doug Hart painted this one. This was the second puzzle collage. The first one we believe was done by Garrido. This was the first one done by Hart, and you'll meet one later. All right. Thank you for confirming that you guys can hear me and that the content is interesting. I really appreciate you guys. Obviously, I think it's amazing and super interesting, and I've been working on it for a really long time. But you never know if everybody else is going to get as into the details as I have been. So this is the licensing stuff that has original unique painted artwork for it. Again, not everything is brilliant here. Dusty is very problematic. But if it's unique, original painted artwork, we want to feature it. I kind of love the happy-go-lucky look of Hit and Run and Repeater here. Basically, it looks like the same face, just with some face camo added for Hit and Run. Anyway, so we're on to the 1989 figures. There's our little splash page. Here's all the 1989 figures. Most of these were done by Mark Pennington. And there's a description of some of the inspiration for those figures. And we also talk about the card backs and offers, of course. The introduction of Rampage, which actually came from Brazil. Now, Night Force Year 2 was a big effort. We also got introduced to the Python Patrol. Now, the Python Patrol were all repaints except for Copperhead, who had not been previously released on a card. So that was illustrated by Doug Hart, and I wanted to feature that really big over here. The same with Slaughter's Marauders. All these were painted over the originals, except for Sergeant Slaughter. This was also illustrated by Doug Hart, and so I wanted to feature that really big as a call out in respect to his contributions to the line. So Unadorned artwork for 1989. Shout out to David Arenas for hooking me up with an international licensing catalog that had all of this unadorned artwork. This was a late edition, and thank you, David. 1989 vehicles. Again, you can find your place, 1989, and we're on the vehicles. So at any time, if you want to try to figure out, where you are, what you're looking for, use these for your years and use this for the index of the content. Now, Guy Cassidy, I wanted to give him a shout out. He designed all of these small vehicles. So he wasn't just the king of big vehicles. He also did a bunch of small vehicles. The Night Boomer was also repainted. So I wanted to show the Sky Striker box art, the Night Boomer artwork, and then the final product. And you can tell that some things were changed, right? So this painting is at Hasbro. It features the original explosion background that was painted on the original Sky Striker, but they painted over the Night Boomer. They painted over the Sky Striker for both of these Night Boomers. And you can tell that they edited this one and pushed it out and scaled it up, right? So there's been edits made, and obviously they got rid of the explosion background and put in that digital explosion background. So a lot of those edits were being made in post-production by this point. Computer publishing, desktop publishing had taken off. And so a lot of those edits were made on the computer. Now, in Brazil, they had been licensing G.I. Joes and making their own G.I. Joes for years. Hasbro finally partnered with them to manufacture overseas vehicles. I don't know if you guys know this. Most people, I don't think, will know this. From 1982 to 1994, all of the G.I. Joe Real American Hero vehicles were manufactured in the United States in factories around Rhode Island. So for them to go out of the country and have Brazil manufacture vehicles for them was a two-factor thing. Number one, the vehicles were already down there because they had licensed them to them so that they could make their own stuff and sell it in South America. Number two, since labor was cheaper, they could do more complex paint applications. So Tiger Force and Python Patrol were both produced in Brazil. So I thought that was pretty cool. Put that together. Slaughter's Marauders, Tiger Force. Now here we get into some licensed artwork. We nicknamed these guys Flathead and Bobber. These were from a fishing kit and a toolkit, a battle-ready toolkit. Those were both put out by the Woodstream Corporation. A little bit of unique artwork created for stuff like crayons. So if that kind of stuff exists, it's in the book. Now, there was a commemorative coin package that came out, and we were able to get some scans off of that. So we got some unadorned artwork. But again, this is, in my opinion, like fourth-tier assets. The best thing would be the painting. The second best thing would be the Kodachrome. Third best thing would be a Kodak print. Fourth best thing would be a published object being scanned, because then you're going to see the print artifacts from the nature of that publishing, the dot matrix kind of stuff. So I got this international licensing guide from David Arenas, I believe, again. And so this was cool because I was able to connect with Richard John Marcege, and he was in the internal art department, and he was responsible for creating a lot of the black and white line art that licensees or, retailers would use for their advertising. So Hasbro would release line art catalogs every year, and the purpose of that was for retailers to be able to advertise the new products that were coming out with black and white artwork. All right, so we'll get through the unadorned artwork. And now we're into 1990, Turning the Tide. This is part of a giant Doug Hart mural that Doug Hart worked on for 2 months. He recalled working on this for 2 months. This was inspired by the Air Raiders piece that I showed you guys earlier for the cross-sell. If you look at this piece, the wide view, I'll show it to you later, and then you compare it to that Air Raiders cross-sell, it's got a similar layout in that there's people on the edges that are up higher, like on the high ground, and then people are working their way up towards them. And so Doug Hart recounted being inspired by that Air Raiders piece when he created this giant piece. So I wanted to talk about, like, the theme for this year was Get Tough. The cartoon Got to Get Tough, Yo Joe came out. It's a much more playful cartoon. Vinny DeLevia talked a lot about the shifting television standards at the time. Things had to be more playful, less serious. And so you get some insight from Vinny DeLevia as to why the Deke cartoon was not only lower quality in terms of the production itself, but was also a little more silly in terms of the storytelling. So that's discussed here. They were close. They were in live action movie production kind of hell in the early 90s. There were several studios, they were writing scripts, they were pitching to Hasbro, and a live action movie almost came. And if you guys remember the comic book movies of the day, it was hard to get a comic book movie produced back in the 90s. So you know it was hard to get a toy line live action movie produced back in the 90s. But there was lots of stuff that was in development, so you'll learn about it here. Tons of insight from Kurt Bazigian, who was vice president of Boys Toys, and Vinny DeLevia, who was in charge of the brand by this point. All right, we'll go through the 1990 figures quickly. And we'll talk, of course, about the artistic inspiration for several of these. We'll talk about the different card backs and offers that were rolled out. Combat Pay would last 3 years. That's the longest running promotion. You had other stuff, other pack-ins like the Combat Command Rings and so on and so forth. Sky Patrol, which were repaints of previously released drivers and pilots, but they had new head sculpts. And the decos were so different that I didn't immediately recognize these as a kid. As an 11-year-old kid, I didn't immediately recognize these as their previous releases. So I thought that was a really brilliant way to go about re-releasing old molds as new characters. So we'll talk about the first Walmart exclusive for Rapid Fire. Walmart was becoming a big customer by that point. Talk about the Sky Patrol. We talk about the packaging revision for 1990 that started to include portraits for every figure that was included. This was actually a cost-cutting measure, so they didn't have to cut out and put the little cellophane in the front and show the figure. This was a cost-cutting measure, but I told Vinny DeLevia I absolutely felt like this was a value added. I would much rather see a beautifully illustrated figure than a little cellophane, poorly lit figure inside of a bubble. So it's funny how something that was done to save money actually, in my opinion, made a better product. These were the Walmart file cards, and there were 6 of them created. These are 2, obviously full-size paintings, but you can tell that the file cards that were released used a small portion of these paintings. So these were all illustrated by Doug Hart. That's his signature right there, H-A-R-T, like a lowercase t. So Doug Hart painted these for a Walmart executive. This did not go through marketing. This did not go through Kurt Bazigian and Vinny DeLevia. This was actually the sales team working on their Walmart relationships. They directly approached Doug Hart and Matt Lizak's packaging department, and that's how this project came about. Now, 1990 was finally the addition of spring-loaded launchers. So this is the original Doug Hart painting. You'll notice that it does not have the drone with the spring-loaded launcher here. That was added to the final packaging. So it's fun to look at the unadorned artwork and see what changes you can see from the final product. There's also some instances of picture-in-picture, kind of small illustrations, and I've blown those up where possible to fill the space and put the spotlight on the artwork itself. All right, so this is all the 1990 artwork. Sky Patrol, obviously a ton of airbrushing done by Doug Hart on all of those. I talk about some of the special effects that Doug Hart brought to the game with, like the canopy, for example. He painted that entire interior with topside, and then he cut out and masked this off and then used an airbrush to do that canopy, that translucent looking canopy on top of the fully rendered artwork. He called those his special effects, and Doug brought some really great special effects to the game. So here's some more unadorned artwork. The general, this was a mystery, and we solved it. I'll let you guys read that paragraph about what the theories were and what our final conclusion was. This is the giant mural puzzle piece that was created by Doug Hart for Milton Bradley. It took 2 months for him to illustrate that, and if you compare this to the illustration for Air Raiders, you'll see, that kind of mountainside and the people working their way up the mountain. It was clearly inspired by the Air Raiders cross-sell. All right, so we're on the 1991 figures. We'll work our way through here. And I like to picture the folks at Hasbro flipping through this book and thinking, what's my next classified figure gonna be? I just know that this is gonna get their creative juices pumping, and I'm excited to get their feedback on it. So we talk about the 1991 card backs and offers here. They did some revisions on the card back, so I'll start calling that stuff out as well. Now, I wanted to introduce Kurt Groen because he was the primary figure designer from 1991 to 1994. He did a little bit of stuff in 1992, 1990 as well. Vapor was his very first figure, first day on the job. So Kurt Groen was a huge contributor to the brand, and we were able to share the pre-production process for Snow Serpent version 2, who came out in 1991. You see the kind of final pencil illustration, a color study, in-house presentation art to show to management, external presentation art by James Payette. You get to see the engineering drawings for the accessories, a 2-up resin painted prototype, also known as a paint master. And then here's the painting by Doug Hart. So really cool to be able to show a figure kind of beginning to end like that. Air Commandos did not feature original artwork on the packaging with the exception of the file cards. So that was kind of a shame, but that's just the way that that product laid out. And then they're all gathered over here. And we also gathered those with the 1991, 1992 pilots, right? So these were the battle copter pilots. All right, then we got into the Eco Warriors. And we'll talk about how in the early 1990s, they did not have a marketing budget. The cartoon was off the air pretty quickly, and how they ended up creating all these various sublines for 2 reasons. Number 1, to capitalize on the other popular brands of the day, but number 2, to create higher price point figures so that G.I. Joe would not depend on vehicles alone to drive profits. So Sonic Fighters, electronic supersonic fighters, that was the first foray into more expensive price per figures because they could justify it because of the electronics that were included. So they didn't just create these, because there was a gimmick available. They created these so that the figure category could start to move the bottom line. You had color change ink with a lot of these. DEF had the electronic lights and sounds. Mega Marines had the Play-Doh, but they didn't call it Play-Doh. They called it BioArmor. And on and on and on. So you get a feeling for, these sub-brands were there to capitalize on other popular stuff of the day, but they were also there because they could charge a much larger price for these figures, and the figures started to get them towards the profitability that they needed to achieve each year. Now, they finally put a photo studio in at Hasbro around 1989, 1990, and so Doug Hart was able to take in his friends and colleagues like Vinny DeLevian, Kirk Bazigian, into the studio to photograph them because Doug Hart excels at making photorealistic portraits based off of photographs. And you could tell that these are lit from multiple angles very dramatically, and you can see how that plays into the portraiture that Doug Hart was able to create starting around 91, 92. All right, so now we get into the kind of peripheral stuff or unadorned artwork. So Electronic Survivor Shot was originally teased as coming for G.I. Joe, but it rolled out as its own non-G.I. Joe product. And so that, they decided they wanted to gear it towards a older audience. That's the backstory there. The Electronic Battle Gear set came out with a beautiful Duke painting. I've got some unadorned artwork for some of the Sonic fighters. Now, presentation artwork that was usually shown internally, which was also created by Kurt Groen, ended up being on the catalog. So this is the first time that presentation artwork kind of went public and went out to the masses. So here we are in the 1991 vehicles. This is a beautiful piece of presentation artwork. Absolutely love that. Here's the 1991 vehicles. This is another piece of presentation artwork for the Battle Wagon. There's fewer 1991 vehicles, but still some good stuff. Now, the video games and computer entertainment created 2 brilliant illustrated pieces. Snake Eyes on the cover and a 2-page spread featuring Blizzard shooting up some snow serpents. The rest of the illustrations throughout here, there's a bunch of screen captures and that kind of thing. But this was all to feature the 1991 Taxon USA Corporation G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero video game. So this was a big year for video games. That came out in 1991. Later in 1991, Capcom put out another game called G.I. Joe, The Atlantis Factor, and this referenced the card art that Doug had created pretty heavily, but it was a new illustration, so that's shown, of course. In 1992, Konami put out an arcade game. This is more of a comic book style illustration, but I wanted to include it here in the video game section. And we start to talk about the move away from painted artwork towards more comic book style illustration. So this was created by Doug Hart for the 1992 catalog. And as you can see from 1982, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, they all featured painted artwork front and center. Most times it was unique and original artwork, with a couple exceptions. By 1990, they just rolled out the revised logo, which I remember as a kid thinking that was so boring and why were they doing that? And then 1991, it was, in my opinion, even worse. It was kind of this line art from the cartoon and then photographs of the toys, but like stylized. It was just really bad. And then 1992, Doug did this pretty awesome comic book style illustration. I really like that. There was some licensed or kind of cross-sell stuff going on that was comic book style illustrations. with the shrinking Joes and the giant cobras. And then the command rings, or whatever these rings were called, that was comic book style illustration. So they were starting to do more and more, so they were starting to do more and more comic book style, line art style stuff. All right, 1992, getting into the figures. I'm gonna shoot through these because I got a battery warning that I've got about 20% left. There's the recalled roadblock that's very valuable and hard to find. We actually got a card back that had been razored off, and we were able to restore that image. Got a really nice scan of that and restored that to make it look like this is a proof card. This is not a proof card. This is just a card that's been razored off and edited to restore it. There was tons of 1992 offers going on, including the gold border Impel cards. Impel came out with a trading card set. Gold border versions were included with figures, as well as Combat Pay was still rolling and a couple other promotions. Ninja Viper was available this year, so he's featured there. Again, all file cards for all figures are included in this book. DEF was only around for a year, unfortunately. They developed a year two, but it didn't make it. This shows all of year one. And this was a packet that was sent out to schools all around the country. Really cool stuff. Trying to move the needle on the war on drugs. I got my hands on the original Kodachromes for all these. I was able to buy those at auction from Hakes Americana or whatever. And I was really, really happy to get those. And then I just basically composited them into this one big image. So I hope you guys enjoy that 2-page spread showing the DEF versus the evil headhunters. And shout out to Kevin Watts. You know, he sold them via auction and I bought them, but we're friends now. Kevin's a great guy, and I appreciate him liquidating his collection so that I could get my hands on some of it and, you know, be able to include it in this book. Shout out to Lenny Lee from Lee's Toy Review. That's where I got the Black Dolphin, which was, this is a dolphin, guys, but it was originally designed as a killer whale. And Alan Hassenfeld came in and said, nope, I want it to be a dolphin because dolphin makes more sense because dolphins are more friendly and they're smarter and they would communicate with humans, and it made sense for him to be the sidekick, not a killer whale. And so that's one of the few times where Alan Hassenfeld came in and made a command decision and said, you know, like with a stiff, firm, this is what we're going to do. And so Vinny DeLevia recounted that story of how they had originally designed a killer whale with killer whale colors, and it was a different sculpt than this one. Then they changed it to a dolphin, but somehow China got their signals crossed and they used the killer whale colors on the dolphin sculpt. So that's the story of Finback, the secret origin of Finback. So you get some unadorned artwork. Now, all this unadorned artwork was illustrated on white at this point. Chad's gone in here and added some background details that match the background designs on the card of figures because I thought that was a massive improvement. And all the Kickstarter backers voted on this. So thank you guys for weighing in and helping to shape this book. So we wanted to talk about the art of archiving, how nothing is ever set in stone. We're always learning. We're always consulting different materials, gathering our data points and making educated decisions. So electronic supersonic fighters and sonic fighters, what year did they come out? Those kinds of things. What year did Sergeant Slaughter? What year did the Fridge? All those things. I've been working in cahoots with Yo-Joe, the folks that were admins there for many, many years, as well as Mark Belomo. And we try to get on the same page, compare notes, and when we make changes, certainly present the case to everybody so the community can get clear signals as to what happened when. All right, so the talking battle commanders is just yet another example of them including electronics so that they could have a higher price point and make these figures move the needle on the total amount of money needed every year. So you'll start to see less vehicles, and that is because the figures were starting to be more profitable, and they were able to kind of get the margins that they needed from the figures, and that allowed them to dial it back on vehicles just a little bit. All right, so these are internal products made by Hasbro. Kid Dimension was actually part of Hasbro, if I remember correctly. Vinny DeLevia ended up working for them years after this. He didn't work for them while this product was here. He was brand manager of G.I. Joe. So this is a beautiful unreleased painting of Duke that was going to be part of the 1995 Battle Corps Rangers. I was able to get this from a gentleman that contacted me through Facebook that found it in a comic book shop of all places. Doug Hart illustrated this for the 1995. This was going to use the 1993 Duke mold, but it was repainted in jungle fatigues. We'll talk about that more in the unreleased section. So 1993 figures, splash page. And look, we'll just shoot through these, but everybody knows there's a ton of Battle Core stuff. These are laid out a little differently than the other pages, but that's because the sheer volume of them. You don't need to see the logo and Battle Core on every one of these packages. So made some design and layout decisions here to be able to fit these and not take up too much real estate. We're still including every single file card for all the Battle Core stuff. We're including all the variant card backs so we can talk about how at this point they were rolling things out in quarterly waves and adding additional product every quarter. That was a very important marketing strategy that they were coming up with. They obviously are including various pack-ins like these mini comics and poster offers and trading cards from the live action TV commercials. There's a bunch of these. I finally just got a full set, so I'm excited about that. There's one little section that talks about the original artwork that was created for file cards. And this is a piece of unadorned artwork that was created for this tiny little box on mail order Deep 6. And so the question remains, out of all of these, how many of these were created in full body paintings like this and just shown in these tiny little insets? If you have any information on this, if you ever come across any of these illustrations, please reach out to me and share like Bobby did with Deep 6 right here. All right, so we also wanted to talk about the explosion of mail order figures in 1993 and the transition to just starting to use product photography for these. They were just cranking it out in 1993, and we talk about that because the sales volume per product had fallen, but they wanted to keep the income coming in. They had goals, right? And so if your sales per product are declining, you have to crank out more product. And so that was the reality. In 1993, that was the reality. And in 1994, that was the reality. And they didn't scale the team up either because they had the same amount of money coming in, right? So it was a tough time. It was a very productive time. They cranked out a bunch of good stuff, but they had to make some sacrifices, like original artwork on the back of all the product file cards, right? This is just product photography instead of illustrations, and that's why. All right, so year 2 of the DEF was actually rolled in to Battle Core. So every one of these figures that were developed were rolled into Battle Core. The figures didn't go away, but this branding was never released in the United States. It was, however, mass produced and released overseas. And so I was able to get my hands on specimens from overseas and feature that in the book, along with a couple pieces of unadorned artwork. Shout out to Kevin Watts for the last minute edition of Headhunter Stormtroopers. Absolutely love this illustration. Would not have had it without Kevin Watts. So thank you, buddy. All right, so Mega Marines was the combination of Play-Doh, although it's not called Play-Doh, and G.I. Joe. There was a couple big monsters. These were not inspired by the scale of Ninja Turtles. Vinny DeLevia actually wished that these were significantly bigger and more detailed to be more scary. And so, yeah, some things don't land the way that you wanted them to. This was an example where Vinny DeLevia was not thrilled with the final product. The original drawings were much more intimidating. I think they just got lost in translation in the sculpt and the scale. And so, yeah, we're very candid about what things the creative team were thrilled with and what things they weren't. Ninja Force was obviously inspired by Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and not Street Fighter, not Mortal Kombat. Ninja Turtles came first in '89, took a huge chunk out of every toy business. And so Ninja Force was very much a response to that. Now, Street Fighter 2 came along, was an extremely popular video game. Kurt Bazigian noticed that they weren't making any toys, and he approached Capcom and was able to strike a deal for pennies on the dollar. They created some really beautiful card art for Street Fighter 2, and they created a bunch of figures for them, mostly reused parts, and the vehicles were all reused and redecoed. Now for 1993, here's all the drivers and pilots. They revised the design a little bit to add these kind of like explosion call out bursts. Now I wanted to show these couple illustrations that were shown in Toy Fair catalog in reference to the 1993 Street Fighter 2 figures. This was recolored, for example, and featured on the package here for Guile. Most of the other ones were recolored from the original package art that was created. So just talking about stuff like that, really getting in detail here. Star Brigade, now these Armor Tech figures were developed initially to feature electronics. There's some indications that some of these would have LEDs and that kind of stuff. They ended up not including any of that stuff, and these figures kind of suffered for it. It was another example where Vinny DeLevia was not thrilled with the final product, the outcome of this. I'm personally not a fan either. Like, where did his arm go? Did they literally cut his arm off and replace it with a cannon? That's crazy. That's crazy. That's crazy. It's just weird. It's just weird stuff. It doesn't really fit too well with G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. Now, they also wanted to ramp up the figure offerings for Star Brigade, and so they took a bunch of figures that had already been made, recolored them, created one package painting, and created this whole subset of Star Brigade fighters. So these are referred to as the Star Brigade fighters, and these are referred to as the Star Brigade Armor Tech Fighters assortment. So these are the Armor Tech fighters, right? And they got their own unique card art. And these are the Star Brigade fighters, and they're repurposed, previously released figure molds. All right, so 1993 vehicles. They got some big stuff out. The Ghost Striker is an awesome vehicle. I really like the Ice Snake. I truly do. This was a fun play feature that fires this rocket pretty far. The Dino Hunters, I know it takes a lot of flack because of the dinosaur, but I think it's an amazing illustration. I absolutely love this illustration. There's a funny story by Vinny DeLevia about how he got sent to the principal's office over the Dino Hunters. I'll let you guys read that. This is the first 12-inch vehicle released since the cancellation of the 12-inch line in 1976. So that's exciting. It's also painted by Bob Lavoie, and I think that's his best illustration for the G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero line. So this is G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero Hall of Fame. This is the 12-inch stuff. All right, so they only got one vehicle out for the Mega Marines, but it's a good one. The Ninja Lightning sold buku, like tons of units. These two did not sell very well. So these two figures are actually pretty rare and pretty valuable. The Armorbot was originally going to be a terrestrial vehicle, and these were two previously released vehicles. So they took this terrestrial vehicle, gave it more of a space deco, and pushed it out as Star Brigade. Star Brigade was really rushed out the door. Again, it was the internal Hasbro team in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, trying to kind of go up against the Kenner team that was based in Cincinnati and blunt their entry into the market with Star Wars toys. All right, so Street Fighter II, these are all repurposed vehicles and play sets, you know, with some additions of rocket launchers and that kind of thing. I actually like the deco of the Sonic Boom tank better than the previous release. So some cool stuff in there. Definitely give it a look. Then we get into the 1994 figures. And keep in mind, this 1994 product, it didn't all come out. They had more stuff planned for 1994. In August of 1994, that's when they made the determination, that's when leadership made the determination that they were going to shut down G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, and they were going to give it a year to the Cincinnati team to develop what they were going to do next, which would end up being G.I. Joe Extreme. In the meantime, you know, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero would be canceled. Sergeant Savage would kind of hold the fort on shelves. All right, so 1994, the product may look like it's limited, but there was more in the pipeline that was not released. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But they did some interesting branding changes here. So we talk about that. Half of these figures were rolled out with these vertical cards, and they had it in the works to do vertical cards for the rest of them. Unfortunately, those got canceled. They were released on dual language cards in Canada, which aren't featured here because this is a G.I. Joe Real American Hero book that just shows domestic U.S. product. Otherwise, it would be another 700 pages. You just can't do it. All right, so we talk about the different card backs, the different offers, the addition of Joe Kubert. So G.I. Joe, the original G.I. Joe, General Joseph Colton, was rolled out, and he was highly promoted in 1994 as a pack-in offer, the G.I. Joe Commander figure offer. He was released in a 3 3/4 inch scale as well as a 12-inch scale, and the advertising that came out for this was illustrated by Joe Kubert, and that was a very conscientious decision on Kirk Bazigian's part to introduce the Joe Kubert art style in advance of Sergeant Savage, because Joe Kubert was going to be responsible for all of that package artwork. Now, the Shadow Ninjas also came out in 1994, and this is another example of where they just took, released the same card art on multiple figures. But not only that, they painted over previous illustrations of Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow for that. So this was clearly done very quickly. Each one of these was painted over from a previous release as well. And so you could see in the file cards, the deco that kind of matched their deco here. But if you look at the Spanish release of the Shadow Ninjas, you can see that Nunchuck, he's only been painted over where he was featured in the file card, right? So he's still got his green and black camo pants, but then he's got his Shadow Ninjas deco on top. So this is yet again more evidence that they were painting over paintings and only painting over what they absolutely had to paint over for the intended purpose. So for creating these file cards, yeah, they didn't even bother to paint over the legs, but somehow that artwork made it to Spain and went on a full file card. They also cut off half of his nunchuck. And, you know, the Spanish, see the nunchuck here, how it wraps around and goes up that way? That was cut off here, and whoever's art directing, you know, for the Spanish product, they just didn't even know. So they didn't even know what to look for. So anyway, painting over painting, saving time, really under pressure by 1994. The Manimals were fully developed and ready to roll out. They were canceled last minute. They were shown in the Toy Fair catalog. Here's the original prototype that was mailed to me by the son of the inventor that created this concept. So thank you once again to everybody that has ever contributed anything to 3D Joe's. All that knowledge and all these assets. This book didn't happen overnight. You know, we started 3D Joe's in 2012. That's 11 years ago. We've been working on these books since 2015. And everybody that's believed in 3D Joe's and contributed information and assets over time, you guys have made this book what it is. So thank you. And also thank you, of course, to all you backers that gave me the financial wherewithal to spend $500,000 on a book. So this is Ron Rudat's line art from 1992. It's amazing to see how Ron Rudat's illustrative style really evolved. Oh my God, it's just so intricate here. You compare this to his ideation from the early 80s, and he's just growing exponentially as an illustrator. These are just absolutely beautiful comic book style illustrations. He was also doing color studies. So this is a color study for Gears. This is the Cobra Commander design. This is what would grow into being the Cobra Black Star. Some of the details are different because they didn't create that much new molds for him. I think they reused somebody else's legs, so on and so forth. So all these figures that were humanoid for 1994 were designed by Ron. If it's an original and it's a human, it was designed by Ron. So I'll try to quickly nail it. Effects, Space Shot, Cobra Commander, Sci-Fi, let's see, Cobra Black Star, and Duke. All of those designs were done by Ron Rudat in December of 1992, and they came out as these Star Brigade figures. So shout out to Ron Rudat he was there from the beginning to the end of A Real American Hero. So I did want to call out the Power Fighters and how they used product photography here, but I wanted to show their file cards because we've showed every other file card. There was no illustrations on the boxes for the Power Fighters, so you won't see that actual product. You don't need to. 30th anniversary, these were recreated. Doug Hart recalled recreating those because the original source material was not available. The General Joseph Colton figure was also released during the convention as a Green Beret. This is a 3 3/4 inch product, but in a 12-inch style box. Similarly, the exclusive figure for the convention was the Fighter Pilot. And this Fighter Pilot was, again, 3 3/4 inch. You can see the figure right there in a 12-inch style box. So 1994 vehicles, there wasn't a tremendous amount of vehicles released this year, but keep in mind that 1993, they released several large vehicles late in the season. So for example, several of the big vehicles would have still been on shelves in 1994, appearing alongside the new vehicles for 1994. Now, as you can see, the 1994 vertical logo came later in 1994. So everything that we see here, you can basically extrapolate from that this stuff rolled out in the spring or summer of 1994. So although it's not many offerings, you still had a ton of stuff on shelves from 93, and all this stuff came out, you know, late spring, early summer. The Blockbuster is an amazing vehicle for those that haven't checked it out. So to close out the book, we have this unreleased section. First, it's the... Sorry about that. My battery is going to die, so I'm going to try to wrap this up really quickly. So 1994 vehicles, there's not a lot here, but keep in mind all the 1993 content would have still been on shelves. And then this was added in the middle of the year, as can be extrapolated by the new vertical logo stuff. I'd say late spring, early summer. And then again, the line was canceled by August of 1994. There was a bunch of stuff that was unreleased though. So we're going to dig in on that. We're going to talk about that. The Killer Whale was going to be repurposed as the Seawolf. The Transportable Tactical Battle Platform was going to be re-released as the Battle Station Portable Arctic Defense Platform. Doug Hart painted both of these. Or actually, Bob Lavoie painted this one. Doug Hart painted this one. Now, there was a ton of figures in the pipeline. Frostbite, Baroness, Dr. Mindbender, Duke. Payload, War Dog, and you can read all about those guys. There was 2 versions of the Baroness, one in black and one in blue and red, and we do believe that both of those are going to be released. Road Pig was going to be one of the Ninja Commandos. They were going to do the Battle Corps Rangers, and this was in response to a lawsuit that actually came from Leonard. Can you imagine the gall of those people who had been knocking off G.I. Joe for a decade, and they got offended that G.I. Joe used the word Battle Corps when their line was called The Corps. So they changed the name to Battle Corps Rangers, and these were going to be some of the key figures and vehicles that were going to be released as part of that lineup. Shipwreck, Bulldozer, Flint. You can see several of the vehicles. The Striker XS1, which is kind of like an all-striker with a net launcher, and these 4 guns all moved at the same time, like in unison. Pretty cool. Vortex XS2 and the Eel. And Vinny DeLevia shared that these vehicles were actually all going to be produced overseas, and that was going to be a big change for Hasbro, because as I had mentioned, all the vehicles from 82 to 94 were produced in the United States, with the exceptions of the higher detail paint apps for Python Patrol and Tiger Force that were produced in Brazil. Ninja Commandos, those are very popular because they were going to roll out in late 1994. So this is an example of late 1994 product. So you can't look at the 1994 offerings and say, oh, they were falling off. Well, no, they were kind of cut short. So the Ninja Commandos were all going to come out in 1994. Star Brigade replicators were very early on in production, and candidly, not super great, but the illustrations are absolutely great. So we feature those. And then an extreme decision was made to hand the brand over to the team from Cincinnati, and that resulted in G.I. Joe Extreme. All right, so just a little bit lightning in the bottle. Wanted to talk about how everybody that I interviewed felt like they were part of something special, because they were. Dedication to my father. Without his values and his example, his work ethic, this wouldn't have happened. He did 28 years in the United States Army, and then he did 20 years in Moore County Public Schools. He's getting dual retirement. He's getting VA benefits. He's getting disability benefits because this man did nothing but work throughout his whole life. And so he instilled that in myself and my brother. My brother's a lieutenant colonel right now, active. So thank you to my father for kind of shaping me into the man that I am. And so that's the dedication for him. You can see him from a young man going through jump school. That's my grandfather pinning on the captain's bars to my father during Vietnam. This is my father in Vietnam as well. This is me sitting on his lap playing with some toys. This is him in El Salvador after they captured some guns. This is him in Fort Bragg just wearing his kind of Lieutenant Falcon attire. This is my uncle who was also in the military, served in Vietnam. My father, my brother, and I. Last big get together for the Rakasans. And yeah, so shout out to my dad. I love you, Father. Thank you for everything. And so the last double gatefold spread, you grab these 2 little arrows, peel them apart, and it is all international artwork. And let this be a teaser of what we might do next, because I've already got 50 gigabytes worth of international artwork gathered, and I'm sure there's another, terabytes and terabytes of international artwork out there to gather. Obviously, I would need to do interviews and research and that kind of stuff too, so that would be a ways off. But what do you guys think? Should I do it? Let's do it. All right, so anyway, thank you to the collaborative Kickstarter backers. All of your credits are there. So those of you that replied through Kickstarter, yeah, your name is there. So just a little teaser about a direction we might take it next, the international artwork of G.I. Joe, a real American hero, or excuse me, I would call it maybe G.I. Joe, an international hero. We've got a couple working titles, but that could be fun. And then again, I already referenced this, but the closing of the book is the final end sheet, which shows why this stuff matters, why the Art of G.I. Joe, a real American hero, is so special to all of us. So thank you to those of you that contributed photos. Shout out to Chad Huckle. That's him in his comic books right there. Chad, we did it. We did it, man. So this is coming. This is the final product, guys. I love it. I'm very proud of it. Obviously, I just spoke for a couple hours about it. So, you know, I couldn't be happier, man. It's bittersweet. Like it's a little bit emotional to be at the end of it, you know. Let me pull up the comments. Hang on one second, guys. Somebody said military families are awesome. They really are. So this is my couple grandfathers That's General Theodore Christopher Metaxas the First, and this is General Carson Abel Roberts, who I'm named after. And I've got kind of a little shrine to them in my house. Anyway, let's see. Let me flip the camera around. I'm tired. That was a lot of talking. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me see if I can pull the comments up. 1 second. Orientation's locked, but can I see the comments? Nice video, 3D Joes. Yeah, it's kind of hard to see the comments this way. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll hop on YouTube and I'll get back to you guys. I'll reply to all your comments. I just want to say there's still 62 of you guys on here. So that's amazing. Thank you guys for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the book. The pre-order. Oh yeah, I can see your comments as they're coming in. So that's cool. Maybe we do it that way. Somebody just asked, I'm going to try to scroll through here. Somebody just asked how long the pre-order is. The long story short is I believe in this project. I do not want these books to sell out anytime soon. And so I have bought a significant quantity of these books. So no pressure to pre-order, but you know, please get your order in because I've invested heavily in this project. And so I need you guys to buy these books. Okay, buy these books. All right, video looks great. Michael Marcy, did you jump on here? Jay Bartlett. Oh, that's cool. You were tagging people so they knew to get on here. All right. Wish I could have submitted. I wish you would have submitted a gift picture too, man. That would have been cool. Would have been cool. Yes, the first 4-part mural puzzle was included. Absolutely. Every painted piece was included. Let's see. Looks good. 100%. Can't wait to receive it. Awesome book so far. Thanks for the detailed narration. Sweet. I'm glad you enjoyed it. This looks fantastic. Just ordered my copy. Awesome. Thank you, Figure Fanatic. That's fantastic. Were any of these artists on 60s Mars Attacks? I do not know. In doing my research, I did not come across any kind of write-ups or bios that talked about them doing Mars Attacks. But that's, I think Earl Norem maybe. If you Google Earl Norem and Mars Attacks, I feel like he might have worked on the comic book, painted comic book covers for a comic book release of Mars Attacks in the 90s. But I can't confirm that. I knew you'd hit it out of the park. Thank you, Clint. I appreciate it. G.I. Joe means a lot to me too, Mark. Emotional seeing the amount of love and work you put in this. Thank you, man. I'm emotional being at the end of this product too, man. I've put my heart and soul into it for years, and especially the last year and a half, 2 years. JoeFan84, you can pre-order yours at 3djoes.com/art. Go to any page on 3D Joe's and scroll to the bottom, and you'll see a link to that page to pre-order. Books are getting here in December. They will start mailing out immediately. I can't hardly believe how amazing it all looks. Thank you. I appreciate it, Todd. This is literally all I've wanted since I was a kid discovering G.I. Joe. This is taking me back in time. Best memories of my childhood. Same here. That's why I'm focused on it. This is way too freaking fascinating. Awesome. Quick Kick deserves his own book. I can't argue with that. 9-year-old me is getting too excited. I'm buying this. This brings me back to being a kid and looking at toy catalogs. Yes, I carried around the 1986 catalog in my back pocket like it was my Bible. And I had Scotch tape on the edges of all of it to keep it from falling apart. So much fun to get the figures that went with the vehicle artwork. Yes, beautiful, incredible, Joe image. Yeah, shout out to Dan Uthman for selling me that catalog, Kodachrome. Absolutely stunning, so pumped, can't wait. All right, thank you guys. Yes to the Tomahawk. I'm probably mentioning Dave Dorman there. I love Dave Dorman's Tomahawk. Zorana is beautiful, especially with the bare shoulders and the dragon tattoo. This is so dope. Now we get to watch it on YouTube 24/7. Put this bad boy on loop. Really good G.I. Joe the movie. Rewatched it last month. Nice compliment to the original classic animated series. I loved seeing the 87 figures and vehicles in that. Just like I love seeing the animated portions of the commercials from 88, 89, because we didn't get to see any of those animated outside of the commercials, All right. Sweet. Toy Connections made it on. 86 was the best cartoon season in Toy Line. That's arguable. It's arguable. Some people might say 85, but I would agree with you. 86. Conquest, second best one-handed jet next to the Rattler. All right. I can't argue with that. I love my Conquest. That was Christmas of 86. Anthony, thank you. I will take Beast as a compliment. Conquest has different flight characteristics. Dang, Carson. Hasbro edited nothing. Yes, Ken. From the text, all 75,000 words, they edited nothing. So shout out to Hasbro for letting me tell these stories for these creators unedited. Let's see, R.L. Stine, yeah, she wrote some of those books. Or he. Is that a he? I think that's a he. Raptor, need a gun? Nope, got my bird suit and my falcon. So much love went into this. Amen, Nav. It absolutely did. Clint, thank you for the kind words, man. Really don't think kids today have anything like we had with G.I. Joe. I have a 4-year-old, and I can confirm that 100%. My daughter's into Paw Patrol now, and they've got vehicles and little dogs, you know, but they're not very articulate. It's just sad, man. It's sad what they have. But yeah, signed by Sergeant Slaughter, Mark Pennington, and Bill Merkline, the sculptor. So thought that was pretty cool. Let's see. Growing Pains. I thought Tiger Force was all right because I started buying the figures in '86. So it was my first chance to really get some of those figures like Flint and Duke. This came out amazing. All the work and efforts you made. The community thanks you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Loving it. Awesome. Excellent. Cool. Brah. It's really amazing. Your work. Awesome work. And thank you, Anthony. Loving this. I mean, growing up, I didn't even know there was this many weeds to get into, and I'm glad you did. This is all just really fascinating. Yeah, getting into stuff like the BBDO, the peripheral stuff, the advertising agencies, the different artists. That's what definitely kept it enjoyable. Hammer was the last vehicle you got. So Nav, that was designed by Frank Coroneros, and he did some amazing vehicles. I love the Avalanche that he did that year too. J. Stephen J. Enjoying how the book turned out. It's everything Pixel Dan's Masters of the Universe book needed to be. Ooh, but fell far short. I'm sorry to hear that. I don't have that book. I do know he worked with a publisher though, right? And I don't think he had the... Let's just say I could carve my own path and do this exactly how I wanted to do it. And so I took a lot of time and I spent a lot of money. And I don't think many other authors have had that luxury. So I don't judge any other author's works too harshly when they're working, by an approval committee, or they're working for a publisher that has page limitations, size limitations. This book has no limits. 712 pages at 13.5 by 14.5. No publisher would want to do that. You have to have someone crazy like me to do that. So Bullhorn came with amazing accessories. You're absolutely right. 1990. Bullhorn, Ambush, there's some great ones in there. Dick, do it cheaper. Yeah, that was it. They definitely came in with the lower quote, and that's why they got the gig, but that's because the budget was lower. So they couldn't afford, to go with Griffin Bacall's Sunbow Marvel Studios by that point. They just couldn't afford it. Looking forward to this. Can't wait for it to come. Should be there. It's getting here in December and then shipping out. So let's do it. The game was pretty cool. Whoa, that's amazing. Can't wait to get mine in hand. This is sick. Brazil need more love. Yeah, they did some great stuff out of Brazil for us. Python Patrol, Tiger Force, the Rampage figure. Combat pay worth lots of stuff. G.I. Joe is Joe tough. Love it. Want to say hello from the Dominican Republic. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. Thank you for the kind words. Hey, what's up, Chad? How you doing, brother? Toy and hobby, beautiful Headhunter Stormtrooper is the best. I agree. That's the best troop army builder from the early 90s, no doubt. Or from the 90s, period. Love me some Headhunter Stormtrooper. He's a great figure. Ace version 3, also an amazing figure. This book's going to be great. No doubt. Yeah, so Chad, regarding where to display it, I'm going to set up a podium in the corner and decorate it like Cobra Commander's podium, put out a piece of, red cloth laying from it, a wooden Cobra logo that was released by Diamond Distributors not too long ago. So trust me, man, I'm gonna have a dope setup in the corner. Shark 9000 is a great vehicle. I had one repainted as the Tiger Shark 9000 using Tiger Force colors, and it's awesome. Kirk is brilliant, Chad. You are absolutely right, and we are lucky that he is still engaged with the brand like he is. All right. Never go to space. Oh, never go to space. It's true. Kills the brand. The cycle looked like it was in competition in 21st Soldier. All right. Those Battle Corps Ranger vehicles were pretty sweet, man, for the smaller scale stuff. And then the larger remakes were going to be awesome. I would kill for a Seawolf, All right, let's see. I'd gladly back a whale too, man. I'd like to see a slightly modern update of it though. You know, like they did with the Hiss tank. I'd like to see that. Not like the Sky Striker where they just emulated it very closely to how the original was with a couple new play features. Like kudos to them for the separate wing action and wheel action. That's great. You know, but they didn't really update the vehicle itself too much. So, military families rock indeed. Oh, thanks, Nev. I appreciate it, man. I'm glad you enjoyed the evening. I was dying to break this thing out, and now I've got to send the publisher the. Yeah, it looks amazing. They're already producing this. If I was gonna stop the press at this point, it would be at a significant expense. So this is already in mass production. These books will be here in December, is what they're telling me. The first shipment's December 7th. So thank you, Vickman. Thank you, Neil. Let's see. Congratulations. Thank you, Wilhelm. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Chad. Clint, again, the pre-orders, they're up. They will be up through the books getting here in December. They will continue to be available into 2024. So just get your order in when you can. They're going to ship in the order received, though. So if you want to be one of the first 4,000 people to receive it, you better get your pre-order in because I've already got over 3,500 pre-orders. It's going to take me a while to get these out, but I'm working with a distribution company, and hopefully we can knock it out in short order. Yeah, Action J, thanks. You know, thank you to Chad is what I'll say to that, who contributed mad hours to this. And thank you to the creators that contributed interviews. And thank you to everybody that's contributed, you know, material assets to 3D Joe's over the last decade plus. Look at this handsome dude. Chad, you're killing me. This book will be my favorite G.I. Joe item. I appreciate that, Jeff. I do. Samuel, shout out to the military service in your family. All right, Redfin01, get it in, brother. Get your order in. Awesome job. Thank you, John. Thank you, Brent. Samuel Edwards, you can buy it at 3djoes.com/art. Shout out to Chris, Jeff, Sam, all you guys, man. Thank you for joining me. I think I'm getting close to the end of the comments. What was the inspiration for the book's layout? It's very much reminiscent of a giant museum exhibit. So, Stephen J, the layout has changed significantly from the soft covers. The soft covers originally, you know, were closer to 8.5 by 11, and I ended up rotating them so that I could do landscape aspect ratios on vertical portrait, you know, aspect ratio books. So I hated that I had to rotate with it. So I knew early on that I wanted to get to a more squared aspect ratio. And I wanted to get to 2 figures side by side. Once we had enough money with the Kickstarter, I knew that we could accomplish a 1-to-1 scale for the figures. The figures were produced at 6x9 for most of the years. That changed in '93. So I wanted to get the 6x9 figures in there 2 at a time. So that dictated the size needing to be at least 13 inches wide. And obviously it had to be 9 inches tall. But I also knew I wanted to get the file cards in there, which adds another 2.5, 3 inches at the bottom. So I really needed it to be over 13 inches tall, over 13 inches tall, over 12 and a half inches wide. So what we ended up doing was 13.5 by 14.5. And the reason for that was so that I could lay out the 1-to-1 scale figures, meaning they're at life size. 2 figures per page, 2 file cards per page. That determined the size of the book. Once I had that size determined, I knew I wanted to do double gatefold spreads so that things that were supreme aspect, like landscape aspect ratio, super wide stuff, I didn't want that to be crammed into that square file format, right? So the double gatefold spreads would allow me to fold a page out and really show those more horizontal aspect ratio pieces at a scale where you could see all the level of detail. Just picture like the killer whale, the headquarters, that kind of thing. I wouldn't have been happy if I had to limit those to 13.5 inches wide. So that determined the double gatefold spreads. Outside of that, man, I just, you know, I went to design school. I've worked in video and animation for the last 20 years, and I literally took it one section at a time. And shout out to Brian Sauer for helping me with setting up some of the initial templates. Shout out to the Kickstarter backers for reviewing those different template options and helping us decide which direction to go in. With the vehicles, with the figures, we came up with several different concepts, and we really put it out there for the backers to help us determine what looked best. And so my inspiration for the book's layout was, you know, it was driven by the size of the products themselves primarily. I wanted to maximize the artwork on the page. I wanted to show the figures at a 1-to-1 scale. But beyond that, we tried a few things for different layouts, and we shared it with the Kickstarter backers, and they got to vote on it. So the Kickstarter backers really helped shape what this book looked like. All right, Chad, I got your Cobra robot. I have not opened it yet, so I'm looking forward to that. Thank you, Wilhelm. I'm looking forward to you getting lost in this book too, man. John, thank you for the kind words, man. I appreciate it. I will continue to do the hard work, heavy lifting on 3D Joes. I'll continue to do the pre-production documentation under that pre-production tab, and I'll continue to do creator interviews and build creator profiles. It is work worth doing, so it's not going away. Yep. Joseph, thank you for the kind words, man. I appreciate it. I'll probably get a second one because I'm going to wear my